I don't have enough information. I can't vote on it.
All right, I can see your point, Mr. Mudge, and the only reason I'm hesitating is just because I'm trying to think about what would be precedent in terms of if it's appropriate that we vote on it, or just the fact that we have always done it that way, which is not necessarily a good way to do things. So that's the only reason I'm hesitating. I'm not hesitating because I have any problems with your vote.
Let me give you a good reason.
Okay.
Please. Suppose we wanted to kill something, the chair or anybody else, or anybody for that matter, okay? There was something on the agenda, and somebody looked around, and we didn't have enough votes to pass something. Anyone could say, I want to take something off the agenda, so, the forum comes back, and then when they come back, we have enough votes to pass it or reject it. I think it's a matter of process, okay, that something be taken off the agenda by vote of the committee.
Mrs. Avanzado.
We have a policy that controls in that regard, and I believe that the superintendent and the chair, whether right or wrong, control the agenda as it stands now under our policy.
I would disagree because it's been posted on the website, and it's a posted public document.
I'm going to refer to Attorney Carroll. Okay.
According to the law, nothing can be voted on unless the superintendent makes a recommendation. So in order for you to vote on this tonight, the superintendent would be recommending that this particular agreement be passed. He is telling you that he's not making the recommendation tonight. So therefore, there's not going to be any action because it's not his recommendation. So he's telling you that he's not ready to make this recommendation, and you're not really tabling it. You're taking it off the agenda for this evening. He's not making, without his recommendation, Mr. Mudge, how can you vote one way or the other?
Well, I would think before someone makes the recommendation, the members of the committee would have some comments to address, questions to ask, and so forth as part of the process.
But wouldn't you be able to then address this when he puts it on at the next meeting?
Yeah, we will be able to address it at the next meeting, and we did discuss it at the last meeting. So I think that's the
Safeguard.
We'll still take discussion on it before we vote. And we did take discussion on it last time we met.
So then why aren't we voting? Because, okay, do what you want.
Mr. Buscard.
Mr. Mudge, maybe this will help. When we first discussed it, Rachel Santa gave us a presentation, and I believe Linda mentioned that CLAC should be a part of it, should hear the information. We all agreed that the CLAC group would listen to her proposition. CLAC hasn't had a chance to. I wasn't part of it, but the superintendent and the chairperson thought that the CLAC was going to would have heard Miss Santa's proposition by now. They haven't, so that's why it's being postponed. Hopefully that helps clear it up.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't have a problem with that. Okay.
All right. Then let's go on to presentations and recognitions. Dr. Auger, do you have any presentations or recognitions?
I just want to mention today how proud I was to have the governor come to Stony Lane Elementary to be a part of a ceremony in which a flag that had been flying in Afghanistan from one of the parents of one of our Stony Lane students was brought to Stony Lane and is now flying at Stony Lane. And there was a ceremony on behalf of the group of military personnel who have come and spoken to our administrators about the relationships that we have as a school district with families who have a military parent, and the kinds of things that we can do to be watchful of those kids and mindful of what they're going through, not only as administrators but as teachers and as a whole school community. And it was a very nice ceremony. And Mr. Ferrario did a tremendous job with it, and it was very nicely done. And the students whose parents are in the military actually made a very patriotic mural in one of the hallways at Stony Lane. So if you get a chance to take a look at that, it's very impressive, and as was the whole ceremony, and the recognition that about, being mindful of kids with parents who are serving right now in the military. So very touching ceremony, and I just wanted to mention that tonight. And I believe it was, part of it at least was filmed by Channel 12, so tonight I wouldn't doubt if it's on their 10 or 11 o'clock news.
Mrs. Benton, you said you had some recognitions.
I would call it an observation of North Kingstown School Department Special Education in action. I had the opportunity to be at one of the eateries in North Kingstown, and there was a class of 7. All of them was in special need. They had been to perform their job, which was at Wickford Yacht Club, and after they left, they were all having breakfast. And I saw education in 4 different forms. I saw reading skills reinforced. I saw math skills reinforced. I saw socialization reinforced, and an introduction to the citizens of this town who observed it, that we are doing something well, and when we have the symbol on our stationery and as our logo, that we educate all children. I will give you an example. In the reading skills, each kid had to read his ticket. In the math skills, each kid, Dr. O.J., had to figure out the price. In the communication skills, each kid went to the counter, paid for their things, counted the money, and did it separately. Those are the things that citizens, if they are out, would like to see. I'm sorry Ms. Santos isn't here, but our curriculum director will direct her. And I couldn't help but mention it, and I called the chairman and asked her if she would give me the opportunity to present this tonight, because it's what you say, education in action and living day to day. And I thought that the audience would like to hear this, and so would the other school committee members. So, but people in the special ed department, the teacher from the high school, and they had a broad range of students, from mild autism up to behavioral. And it was quite a picture to see. So we are doing something good, and we are working to educate all children.
Mrs. Avanzato.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that over the weekend, I attended the variety show here at North Kingstown High School, and I was pretty much floored by the talent of these kids. It was just amazing. I mean, all the way across the board, the musical talent. There were several ballerinas that were literally looked like prima ballerinas from New York, and the music was amazing. Singers, and they had several acts. It was thoroughly entertaining. I had to leave at one point, to make a call, and I didn't want to leave because I didn't want to miss any of the acts. It was really, really good. I would highly recommend it to anyone. They do it every year. It was just very enjoyable, so the students were wonderful.
You didn't comment on the school committee act, which
Yes,
I heard
there
there
was
was, and I heard that it was humorous.
Yes, it was very funny, actually. They came out, the kids came out, there were 2 students sitting in a classroom, and budget cuts came down, and then everyone took everything away and gave them rocks to write with. That was the skit, so.
Hopefully it won't get that bad tonight.
Yeah.
That's cute.
All right, I had a couple of recognitions. Mr. Idavita emailed us and told us that both the middle school jazz bands performed at Moses Brown School, and both Wickford and Davisville Middle School received superior ratings, so congratulations to Wickford and Davisville, to Mr. Idavita and Mr. Thibodeau. We also received that information that junior Allegra Gribble was the high school's only representative in the national Spanish exam this year, and she ranked in the 80th percentile and received a bronze prize for her performance. So congratulations to her. We had our physics team go off again this year to the Eastern Massachusetts Physics Olympics, and they took first place in one of their events. So congratulations, they were the top scoring team in that event, and I don't have any other information as to what that event was. We also had senior autumn, is it Gillette? Oh, well. Is that how I pronounce it? Giat, thank you. Okay. Actually, she's a sophomore, and she won first place in the senior division individual performance for the 2012 National History Day in Rhode Island. So congratulations to her. She was awarded a labor award for the Rhode Island Labor History Society for her piece, Clara, the Voice That Incited the Uprising of 20,000. Also, we had a team go to St. Louis, Missouri over April 25th through 28th for the first World Robotics Championship. And so congratulations to Nick Graham, Corbin Johnson, Katie Johnson, and Matt Cirillo. They were part of their competition Airstrike 78. So, and they finished fifth in the world. So good job to them.
Excellent.
So that's it for presentations and recognitions. We now have citizens' comments. It is a work session here tonight, so anybody who is signed up here may come up and speak now, but we will also, because it is a work session, we will take citizens' comments before we vote on each item. So there will be other opportunities if people would like to speak before we vote. Signed up for right now, we have Richard August and then Sandy Blankenship.
Richard J. August, 79 Apple Tree Court. Madam Chairperson, I guess now is the time for some hard decisions. The second tier of the superintendent's recommended cuts are going to have to be addressed, and they're going to be tough. I have a suggestion to make, because there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to come to the microphone now or later during the program when you discuss the budget, and they're going to argue for a program or a sport or an activity. But my suggestion is this, Madam Chairperson. Anyone, whether it's a committee member, a student, a parent, a union member, or just a member of the public who comes forward to argue that a program, a sport, a team should be saved, has to make a revenue-neutral recommendation. That is, they have to identify where the offsetting expense reduction is going to come from. Because the superintendent has laid out a series of reductions to balance the budget. And it's easy to come up and say, well, this program should be saved, or this sport is essential, or whatever, but then there's got to be an offset. Someone has to make the decision where the offset is, and if you're prepared to argue for a program, sport, or activity, you should be prepared to identify where the offsetting expense reduction is going to come from. I note in the budget handout to this evening's program, I tried to compare it to the handout that was prepared back in February, and I'm working with it a little bit, but it's not totally clear to me. But at the top where it says expenditure changes to the budget since the February approval, the very first line says fund an estimated deficit in the food service fund, $186,000. Every year, this has been called to your attention going back to the days when Bacon and Edge did an evaluation of school department programs, 7, 8, 9 years ago now? We are the last school district with an in-house food service program. You simply have to come to grips with it. $186,000 is a lot of money when you're looking at the types of cuts that have to be made. I'm sure that some people will come forward and argue that we need to have an athletic program, a team, because their students need an opportunity to obtain a scholarship to college. But I'd like to just briefly read a couple of sentences from an article that appeared in the Providence Journal that was sent in or submitted by the executive director of the Rhode Island Interscholastic League. And I'll be very brief. He writes, "Consider the following statistics and odds of scholarship money for 98% of high school athletes. Some 59% of high school football players and basketball players believe that they will receive a college scholarship. And I would venture to guess that the percentage of parents is even higher. But the reality is 1 to 2% of high school athletes receive a Division I athletic scholarship. Only 1 in 13,000 high school athletes will ever be a professional player. 3 out of every 10,000 high school basketball players will play in the National Basketball Association. The odds of becoming a brain surgeon are greater than earning a spot on an NBA team. The idea of obtaining college athletic scholarships and tickets to the professional ranks is a myth for most student athletes." And that's from Thomas Mezzanotte, who's head of the Rhode Island Interscholastic League. And let me just close by stating that, as I said, I haven't had much of a chance to look at the handout, but the handout shows, and I hope I'm reading this right, that concessions from the ESP union totaling something north of $1 million is included here. I'm not quite sure how that works on page 2, and I'm sure that'll be explained later on, but it's not clear to me what that means. But certainly, Mrs. Carroll can advise you that the court has ruled that a budget that includes expense reductions or savings to be identified later is not a balanced budget. So I'm really not sure how that works in here, and hopefully that will be explained. Thank you.
I will explain that later.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. August. Sandy Blankenship.
Good evening. To be quite honest, it's Sandy Blankenship, by the way, 103 Dodge Street. I've been struggling all day as a leader to even figure out what I wanted to say this evening, but I felt that as the leader of the NKESP, I had to make some sort of a comment. Dr. Auger, your email, I'm sure you received answers to the email that you sent out today, is probably as well as phone calls, just like I did. I can tell you that many of my members were outraged, not just because of the reductions and what it means. I think that we all instinctively knew that that was coming. Obviously, it's, the writing was on the wall. The problem with the message was that it seemed as though, or it almost inferred, that a lot of this falls on the shoulders of the ESP. And I don't believe that to be true. Therefore, I guess my comments tonight, as I thought about it, I needed the public to know that we believe that we own a part of that at the negotiations table. We did make concessions several times over, and we tried. It was never enough. We did what we could do. And so we are in arbitration, the land of the unknown, I call it, because that's what it is right now. Neither one of us, neither party knows what's going to happen at that table. But the public needs to understand it is not just this NKESP union that has caused the issues. The town council didn't support us the way they should have with the 4%. That's a true fact. All right? Our negotiations didn't go as well as we thought it would go. True fact. The state, we don't know what we're going to get from them. Another unknown. And yet, the public message, and maybe maybe, Dr. Auger, you didn't mean for it to be received as such. But it does feel, when you look at the message and then you look at this and the titles, it feels as though the burden now belongs to us, and now it's not what it was. Now it's $1.something million for 1 year. We're all tired. We all want the same thing. And you need to know that the ESP in this district are just as tired as you are. We want the same thing. And we're hoping that arbitration brings us both together again, cooperatively. Please don't make us the enemy in the public's eye. We're not the enemy. We're trying. We tried. We're still trying. It just is what it is. Let's all accept the responsibility that we own in this. Throwing rocks at each other is not going to help. It's definitely not going to help. And I truly hope that ends. That ends. It is what it is. The sad facts are that these reductions, they're awful. It's terrible to look at. But this union doesn't own it all. It's all I'm saying. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to come up and speak at this time during citizens' comments? Okay. It's Superintendent's report. And the Superintendent has asked me, should we get right into the cuts right now, or does the committee want to go through the consent agenda and then get into the Superintendent's report? I guess that would be my question. Mrs. Avanzato.
I would say to do consent first, because I know that Mr. Cerisi was going to try to make it, but I don't know if he will, because he's still quite having difficulty getting around. But
Mrs. Benson.
I was going to say, since the budget is a priority, that I could conceive with going through with the consent agenda. But I would like to see the budget, because we have a report of his cuts. And in order to be fair to the citizenry, I would suggest that we take a line-by-line cut on the budget, or either couple them together as in departments. So the budget is the most important thing. So let's...
So am I hearing that you all want to we'll go through the consent and then we'll immediately go into the budget? Is that what people are saying?
That's what I'm saying. I don't know how the others feel.
Well, I've heard from you and Mrs. Avanzato, and Mr. Welch is signaling that, yes, he wants to do that too. So why don't we go ahead and do that, and then we'll get into your report. So that brings us, we're going to step right into the consent agenda. Well, actually, first we need to do, is there anything to disclose for executive session, Lorraine?
Just one vote. Motion was made by John Biscardin and seconded by Linda Avanzato to adjourn executive session and go into open. Motion passed 4-0. And then we need a motion to seal. Oh, I'm sorry. We're in recess right now, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're in recess.
We're in recess, so okay. That's it. Okay. All right. On consent agenda, are there any items to be exempted from the consent agenda? Mr. Busgarden.
C2, please.
Mr. Mudge.
B and
I'm sorry.
C.
Did you say B?
B.
Thank you.
And C4 and 5.
Is there a motion for the rest of the consent agenda? Mr. Welch.
So moved.
C6.
second, Mrs. Benson's motion. Is there anything left, actually?
Oh.
Yeah, there's a few things.
Yeah, C3.
I had a motion. Are you?
Seconding your motion.
Second?
I did.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to approve the rest of the consent agenda, which I believe is just C1 and 2. So all those in favor say aye.
He attempted to.
I'm sorry,
He
C1 and
attempted
3.
to.
1
He
and 3.
attempted to after the motion was made.
No, he didn't. He made the first motion.
He did.
Okay. So a motion to approve C1 and 3. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Mudge, B1.
Yes. In looking at B1, as part of that, I noticed there was a form in here which I had questioned why it was in the minutes of the meeting. And that form is on page 65. And in it includes a statement to the Board of Elections about the,
Oh, you're talking about correspondence, Mr. Mudge.
no, it's, I don't think it was, well, it was in the minutes of the meeting for, I believe, the 24th. Is that correct?
No, that is in correspondence. That is not in the minutes.
Is in this meeting's correspondence?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's not in the minutes.
Okay.
So is there a motion to approve B1?
So moved.
Second?
C1.
I'm going to abstain.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Abstain.
Mr. Mudge abstains.
Same.
Mrs. Benson abstains. All right. Executive session minutes of April 24th, 2012. Mr. Mudge, did you have a question about that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say, I didn't, no, I didn't, that was just the one I had. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So, no problem.
Is there a motion to approve B2?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes.
Abstain.
Okay. Mr. Mudge abstains. Okay. And as I remember, Mr. Mudge, you weren't here during that time, so
Correct.
thank you. Mr. Busgarden, C2.
Yes. I've brought this up a couple times before. You're asking us to appoint a coach for the boys lacrosse team. Currently, they've already played 8 games, 4 up and 4 down. There's 5 games left. My question is, why are we appropriating funding for a coach while the season is, or we're in mid-season? I would like to make a motion that we approve coaches 1 month before the season opens.
I'll second that. A minimum of 1 month.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, you may speak to that.
You know, Mr. Busgarden, I understand your point. However, you know, and I apologize for not knowing why this is coming before us right now. I will check on this for you tomorrow morning. You know, I should have picked it up ahead of time. I would love to be able to tell you that we can appoint all of our coaches a month ahead of the season. However, that's just not the reality of the way a school system always works. It's what we would want, but it just doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes coaches, particularly assistant coaches, can be harder to find. In the case right here, we have one that's a volunteer. So I don't know for a fact that this person, you know, came on at the very beginning of the season, and I don't know why the, you know, bureaucracy, if you will, of getting this to us took so long. I'll check on that, and we've tried to do this more cleanly, and I think you're seeing a lot fewer of these than we have in years past. But to tie our hands like that, to say that a coach can't be hired within 1 month of the beginning of the season, I just think is unrealistic, and it's going to create a lot more problems than it's going to solve.
Oh, Professor, Doctor. The season's half over. Why do we need an assistant coach now?
Well, I don't know that the assistant coach hasn't been, you know, at the job for a while. I just don't know why the paperwork has gotten to us so late. We've been doing our best to get this here sooner. I don't know the specifics as to why this one is late. I mean, if you're looking to send a message right now, I'm getting the message, and I'm going to try to do something about it. But I just don't feel, you know, pursuing what you're asking to do would necessarily solve this problem. I think it would create a lot of other problems.
I see Mrs. Benson's hands, I see Mr. Mudge's hands. I'm going to just comment for a second. I do know that sometimes parents don't realize, such as on the boys' track team, that there are 67 boys who are out there with basically two people, the coach and the assistant coach. And so as they start finding this out, or they have a special expertise because they have played a sport in a high school or perhaps in college, they then volunteer their time. And so when you have 67 boys just on one team and you have them all different age ranges, it's the sort of thing of they suddenly say, yeah, it'd be great to have you. And so then it's the sort of thing of we get their names a little later because they have to go talk to Mr. Marcello. We have to make sure that they fill out the appropriate paperwork. So that is sometimes why you have many of these volunteers who come on a little bit later, because they're the parent who sees a need and the coach is so enthusiastic to have them because it's one more body out there with them. So, to say that we have to do this a month ahead of time would be great if it was doable, but not always do the volunteers realize that they can fit it into their schedule or it is something that they would like to do.
I understand, Ms. Page, but I was specifically addressing the assistant boys lacrosse. I was not...
The paid coach.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
That was the one I was particularly addressing. Volunteer coaches, I realize they can come and go. I was addressing the paid assistant lacrosse coach.
Mrs. Benson and Mr. Mudge.
I would like to add to that is that maybe, and I'm sure this will remedy that with the paid coaches, if the athletic director will advertise them at an early date, and within the advertisement for the position, he can state subject to the number of enrollees. And I think that would take care of that with the page coaches, because this has been brought up through the years, and I think this is the second time you brought this up, isn't it?
At least, yeah.
So why don't we get a hold of the athletic director and ask him, when he make the advertisement for coaches, which they have to advertise according to state law, and that he will say depends upon the enrollees in the sport, and then we wouldn't have that. That would be one way of correcting that.
Mrs. Benson brings up a good point here. Perhaps we should actually ask the question before we have the motion and find out what's going on. So if you would consider withdrawing your motion, we can get some more information and then get back at you, back to you about why this is happening. That might be the way to go here.
If you would wish to table
Mudge.
this item, I can come back with it in 2 weeks with the rationale.
I did not mean it to go into a rationale.
Okay, Mr.
Bigger subject. The point is moved with me. Just instruct the athletic director to, in his advertisement, in paid coaches, not volunteers, use the phrase subject to enrollees. So I don't think that need a study. That is my opinion.
Mr. Mudge.
Thank you. I raised this question several times last year and earlier this year as well, and Mr. Scott has too. And I'm just wondering if somebody's not paying attention to what the tasks, their jobs are, get to exercise their job and get it done on time and on schedule like most people in private industry has to do. Now, I can see there may be occasionally there could be some issues that you didn't get a coach and so forth and so on. But if that's the case, then I think you ought to notify the school committee that you're unable to, or you haven't been able to hire a coach at least within a month before the season starts, so that school committee is aware of it. And I'm sure the school committee can then, ask the questions at the appropriate time. But to assume that we can continue this practice and come in, halfway through the season is bothersome to me, especially if we haven't hired a coach or the staff, and for God forbid there's an accident or something else, and the coach is held liable, and we are not covered by the trust of somebody else. Now, I asked that question, I think, last year as well. okay, is what's our liability, God forbid, if something happens? So I agree with Mr. Scotton, and I think maybe another way to do that was maybe we could amend that motion to say, let's have a schedule when all the coaches will be hired, and then let's follow the schedule, and we can't, then let's notify the school committee.
What I would suggest is pretty much exactly what you are suggesting, Mr. Mudge. I will check this out and find out why the delay, and in the future, if anything is untimely in terms of coaches, I will let the school committee know the reason why when it comes up. But, I just want to point out that, I haven't done an intensive study of this or anything, but it's my sense that the number of these has certainly gone down in the last, recently we hire, dozens of coaches every season, and there's always one or two that seems to become an issue each season. And, we're not perfect, but we're trying to do the best we can. Mr. Marcello is aware of that, and we're going to continue to do the best we can. I apologize for not having the rationale for that tonight. Just missed it. There was a lot of other things on my mind this week. So I'll get the reason for you, and if you want to wait to vote for 2 weeks, we can do that before I get the reason. But I would still recommend that you approve this tonight, and I will get the reason for you regardless.
Mr. Welch.
Two quick things. One is, I'm looking at this dollar number, and I don't know if that's for a full season or half season, quarter season, and I don't know, so I'd like that to be answered, just what that represents. If that's for a full season and the guy's been there for a half a season, then he should get half that amount, I would think. The second thing is, and I stand to be corrected on this if I'm wrong, I believe under the teacher's contract, they have first priority on coaching positions and the stipends paid. When you're considering this, or maybe we need to make a policy or do something about this, that you say that 30 days before the sport starts, if you don't have a coach from the teachers union, then we open it up to the public at large. Maybe that will help us get some coaches on time. Thank you.
I know this particular coach has coached before for us, I think, at lacrosse, and sometimes it's the sort of thing, if things they are hired at the appropriate time, but then we have the 2 weeks of lag time. So we have a motion on the floor a motion to approve the coaches 1 month before. Do we want to continue with this motion, or are we going to table it until we get more information? Mr. Busgarden.
Ms. Page, I will table it, and I just want Dr. Ogier to know, Doctor, I'm not rattling sabers. I'm not trying to make a point. It just seems to me that sports can be you can pretty much set your watch to when certain seasons, pretty much all seasons are going to start within a week or two. And it just befuddles me that we're hiring an assistant coach 8 games into the season. That's not a week or two. That's over half the season is gone. I just think we could do a better job. It points to organization. This kind of thing points to the lack of organization, actually. And I just think that is, I don't want something like this to discolor all the hard work that you're doing and that we're doing. I just think that we could get a better handle on making sure the coaches are in place and approved when the season begins, or shortly thereafter, certainly not halfway through the season. But I will table it for further discussion later.
Mrs. Avanzato?
Yes, I think we do need to get the information. Obviously, something we've all mentioned in the past, but I'm wondering whether funding and the way funding happens in the athletic department might have something to do with this. They fundraise some of these funds, and then they divvy them out to different teams. And if they don't have the money at a certain time, then perhaps that's why they don't fund a coach at the time. I could be wrong. That's just a guess. But anyway, I guess we'll wait and hear back what Dr. Ogier has to say.
I'd be happy to come back in 2 weeks. I just don't want to jump to any conclusions. I don't know that this is – I take full responsibility for not checking on this right now, but and maybe that is my lack of organization. But I don't want to go down the road of saying that, whether it's the AD or the Human Resources Department or anyone is not organized appropriately. I just don't know the story on this. It may be something that this is the first opportunity they had to get to this. I just don't know. So I will check on it. I will try to do my best to make sure that these things come to you in a timely manner, and if they don't, I'll have an explanation as to why.
Do we have a motion to approve C2? Do we have a motion to approve C2?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. I see hands. We've all talked on this. I see Mr. August. This is what I want to say. This is the consent agenda. One of the things we should be reminding all of us that we should make sure that we find out some of our information before we come here so that we can get through our consent agenda easily. So Dr. Roger is always available. So what I want to do for the rest of the consent agenda is when we go into it, I want to basically take the motion to approve or not to approve, then we can have discussion. We'll go down the table. I'll give everybody 3 minutes max if you want to speak on it, and then we will vote, okay? Because I don't want to have to keep on going back because we have really important things on our agenda tonight, and we don't need to spend 20 minutes on consent agenda things. So I apologize. I was going to say that at the beginning of the meeting, and I didn't, and now I feel like we're getting off on an area that we need to concentrate on the budget. So, that was why we took the consent agenda first, was to get through it. So I'm going to call Mr. August.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. To me, there's so many questions up here about this one item. First of all, it was removed from the consent agenda when you started to discuss it and accepted a motion. So it's not part of the consent agenda any longer. And secondly, the correct motion is, I heard it said by, I think, the superintendent, the correct motion is to lay this on the table for 2 weeks, given these questions. That's the end of the discussion. If there's a motion to lay on table and a second, vote on that motion and close the discussion. Give them 2 weeks to come back with an answer. Thank you.
I believe what we're laying on the table for 2 weeks is the question as to if we need to approve prior to 1 month all athletic. So, yes, Mrs. Carroll.
Can I just make one comment? One of the reasons that I insist...
We can't hear you at this end. Speak in your mic.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson. One of the reasons that I asked that all coaches be put on the agenda, including the volunteers, is so that they're covered as appointed coaches under our insurance through our trust. So I understand what you're saying, Mr. Biscardin. I've listened to the same argument for a few years. You're right. I've questioned some of these, and sometimes I hear, well, the BC, we will wait late in getting the paperwork back and things like that. You're right. You should know them ahead of time. But for safety right now, I'm asking that you whatever you want to do in the future is fine. If you want to say that from now on, if there's anybody that is being hired in the middle of the season, you need to know why they weren't hired at the beginning of the season. But just for our insurance purposes tonight, I'm going to ask that you approve these two tonight, and then we understand that from now on, we need to explain why they're being hired halfway through the season. I don't want to take a chance that the kids are going to be alone with these two people, and they're not appointed coaches by the school department.
No, I move to approve them.
Yeah, and again, that's...
So we have a motion on the floor and a second. Mr. Mudge, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm certainly going to approve this. But again, I'd suggest, Dr. Ogier, a couple things. I think what we need to do is have, because a month may not be enough time, before a season. For example, you probably want to have your coaches for your football and your fall sports on hand no later than July, to say the least, right? So there may be a time schedule that you should have for the appointment of every coach, especially a new coach. If you have a coach that's been there 100 years, that's a different thing. But if you're going to have a new football coach or whatever the fall sport is, it may have to be, you have to deal with this in June or July. Now, with that said, I would look at that and maybe look at a hiring schedule. Also, what we don't have here is, what's this being funded from? Is it general fund money? Is it what's the source of funding?
Yeah. It's general fund money.
Thank you. I would appreciate that we could indicate that.
Mr. Mudge, I think we agreed that if it wasn't general fund money, then we were going to be specific, like private funds or volunteer. We said that's what we're doing. If it's not general fund, we're identifying them at private funds. If they're a true volunteer, we're identifying them as a true volunteer.
All right, before we take Mrs. Benson, and then we have the citizens' comment.
Before we go to that, with the revised budget that we have and some things being cut, I would suggest that even in tabling this, that we would do all of it. That was what I wanted to say before such a long conversation involved, that these things would be taken care of, because what we've got on this budget sheet, not going to be enough money.
Yeah, but those are budget cuts for next year, not for this year.
Well, wouldn't you prepare? The farmer puts grain in the storehouse in the fall.
All right. Citizens' comment. Please state your name and your address for the record, please.
Yes,
Thank you.
Chris Madoyan, 70 Spring Road. I usually come to the meetings, kind of sit in the back. Thought about speaking, but haven't. But on this subject, in the length of time that you're taking to review it, I think I sat through one of these meetings when you questioned why you were being asked to approve someone on the agenda when you weren't given the information. And you were asked to review the agenda and have your questions prepared before. Mr. Auger had mentioned that he was available to answer those questions. I think, Mr. Auger, you do own some responsibility here not having the answer. But Mr. Boscard and Mr. Mudge, I believe this agenda is put out earlier that you could have raised those questions. I don't have a son involved in lacrosse, but I surely know that I believe the lacrosse coach, the varsity lacrosse coach, stepped down just prior to the season starting. I believe they had to move somebody up, so maybe that's why this person was put in late. I'm not saying that it's still not late in terms of it being addressed to you, but I think you spent a lot of time asking about this without any of the facts. As Mr. August said, if you simply took the recommendation, Mr. Auger, to table this for 2 weeks, we could have moved on. Didn't want to sit here and listen to this conversation. We'd like to hear more about the budget items.
Just to let you know, I didn't see this until yesterday.
No, citizens'
I didn't
comments,
get
the
this.
citizens' comments, we do not, it is the citizens' time to comment, and we do not respond. Thank you very much.
You can respond.
We are not going to.
We have the option to
We are
respond.
not going to.
Is that,
It's just their comment, and they're allowed to speak. All right, so we have a motion on the table and a second. Voting, Lorraine, can we take a roll call vote?
Linda Avanzado.
Yes?
Mel Boyd Benson.
Yes.
John Biscardin.
yes?
William Mudge.
Yes.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welsh.
I guess it's yes. I'm not really sure what we're voting on anymore.
We're voting to approve the appointment of the coaches.
And the stipend, I gather.
Yes.
I would hope that would be
Passes
included.
6-0.
All right. Mr. Mudge, you exempted C4. Do I have a motion on the floor, and then we'll have discussion around C4?
So moved.
Second?
All right, discussion. Mr. Mudge.
This is a summer program. Aren't these summer programs financed by, other than general fund money?
No, this is a general fund item. It's summer work because it involves non-public textbooks. It's a person who comes in, helps to organize the non-public textbooks so that people can access them. It's not a summer school position.
I'm just, you're saying somebody comes in, again, I'm not sure I even understand the function now. We have somebody...
They organize the non-public school textbooks so that the non-public school kids and their parents can access them.
Okay, that's, okay, thank you.
It's run out of the central
Yeah.
office. We've been doing it for years.
All right, we have a motion on the floor and a second. All those in favor of approving C4, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Okay, we have a motion, we have item C5. Do I have a motion to approve
So moved.
C5?
Second?
Motion on the floor. Mr. Mudd, do you have a question? You exempted this.
No, I meant 6, not 5, so, no, I don't have a question.
All those in favor of approving C5, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. We have C6. Do I have a motion to approve C6?
So moved?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor to approve the sports camp director. Mr. Mudd, you had a question.
Yeah, how do we rate the salary of $7,210? And that's out of the enterprise fund account, and are we sure with the enterprise fund account can, afford that? And do we have a schedule for the summer for the enterprise fund and the activities and all the other good stuff?
I don't have that information in front of me, Mr. Mudge. My assumption is that this has been the same number that has happened in previous summers. I don't know how that particular number has been arrived to. I know it's handled through an enterprise account that's on our budget page, but, again, if this is something that you need me to obtain, I can come back. Or in the future, if you want to, email me when you get the packet and let me know that that's going to be a question, I'll get it for you before the meeting even begins.
Well, what I'd like to see is the entire enterprise fund budget.
Well, that's not something we generally do when we appoint a person to a job.
Well, I guess I understand, but if you had the budget for the enterprise fund, then this information would be in it, just like a school budget, just like your salary, anybody else's salary.
Well, I assume that exists. However, I do not have it in front of me right now. Again, if you can ask me this a few days before the meeting, I'll come with the information in hand.
Well, again, I don't think I need to ask for the enterprise fund account to come before us to be approved. It should be automatic, just like the cafeteria fund.
All right, if there are no other discussion, we have a motion on the floor and a second.
That was my exemption.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Sorry, Mr. Welch, what did you, go ahead.
I had similar questions, and I'd like to have this tabled.
A second.
We already have a motion on the floor to approve this item.
Well, that's because you put it on the floor before we could discuss it.
No, we had a motion on the floor, and now we're having the discussion.
But what you're saying
Mr.
is,
Welch is asking for you to vote against the motion. Mrs. Avanzato.
I would like to see all of us do a better job at getting information before the meeting. I do it too, but on the other hand, maybe we should, since this is not something that's taking place immediately, maybe we can table this and get the information.
Is your motion?
Well, I will remind the committee that summer camp information has gone out. And, it's the sort of thing of this is being advertised, and we've had presentations before this committee before as to how summer camp works, and that it is an enterprise fund basically so that it makes all the money. It's a self-funded sort of thing. So if you don't get enough kids for the camp to pay the camp directors, then you don't run the camp. All of the money for the camp director's salary is generated from the camp. So it is the sort of thing of that's how Mr. Thomas's salary is paid for, and I don't know if this number is the same from last year, but the camp is self-sufficient. So it's just we approve as to his salary, and then based on the number of kids who sign up is how it is determined as to which coaches then he pays, and we have to approve them because for insurance reasons. But it is an enterprise fund. Mrs. Avanzato.
If members feel they want to review it, then perhaps in the future we could have it come before the committee. It's just a suggestion.
Repeat.
In the future, we could have it come before the committee if members feel they want to review it and how the practice is. We can discuss it at a later point. I think it's rather unfair to hold it up now because we haven't asked the question early enough.
Well, I would think that the enterprise fund
Let's make sure we go down the table. Mr. Welch, was there anything, this was your request to exempt this. Was there anything else that you wanted to say about this?
Look, all I'll say is I agree with certainly with having the questions before the meeting. With all of the time that recently a lot of us have spent on budget items, et cetera, and having another life besides school committee, I'm sorry, I didn't get this done. I just feel as though there's some information that I would like me and this committee to have on this particular item, and delaying it for 2 weeks I don't think is the scourge on the earth. But If it's the pleasure of this committee to go ahead and approve it, then go ahead and approve it. Thank you.
Mr. Busgarden.
Yeah. What do we have to do procedurally to table this? Do I
You need to withdraw your motion.
I
You
withdraw my
withdraw the
second.
motion.
I withdraw my second, because I seconded it. And I, too, like to apologize for not, I spent a good amount of time with Dr. Auger last evening and this morning speaking about the budgets. I'm sorry that the subject of the coaches didn't cross my mind when I was talking about much more important things.
So, Mrs. Avanzato, would you like to withdraw your motion?
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay. We will put this back on the agenda on May 22nd.
Thank you.
All right. So we are finished with the consent agenda. And Dr. Auger, why don't you go into the budget items?
Thank you. Apologize to the people in the audience tonight for taking so long to get to this. I know this is primarily what people have come for. I want to make a few comments before I begin about, where we are, and I will try to do this as expeditiously as I can, go through this and hit just about every item, if not every one. We start, this conversation tonight, after getting a 2% increase from the town council, and that is something that, I don't want to downplay. That is very much appreciated. That equals roughly $90 of taxpayer money extra for a person owning a home or property of approximately $300,000. So that is, that's a lot. We pay a lot in taxes already, and adding this is something significant. As I think everyone in this room probably knows, the school committee and myself included, we were hoping for a 4% increase, and that would have given us a lot more funding here right now to have a list that's far less extensive as it is right now. So, since October, when we met with the town council, we were aware that this could be a very troubling year in terms of our budget. There has been, inflation is not the friend of school budgets right now. And there are a lot of issues that schools departments deal with that we essentially have very little control over. And I've mentioned a lot how much, 31% in the last 3 years, that Blue Cross payments have gone up to the school department. Our funding certainly has not gone up anywhere close to 31%. With this 2%, it's gone up 3.4% over the last 4 years now. So it doesn't take a math genius to understand that it's very hard to keep up. And we're in a cycle right now, unfortunately, where even an increase means that you have to cut a great deal to keep up. Adjusted for inflation, the equal spending to this year's budget would come up to $60,022,427. I believe this document, I think most of you should have it. If you don't, I believe it's in the back of the room. And so the allocation from the town, $57,243,694, still leaves us with $2,778,733 that we need to cut in order to have a balanced budget. So obviously, there's a great deal of work to do here.
Point of order. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mudge, this is Dr. Auger's presentation.
Yeah, I understand,
So, no, I'm not going to take any point of orders. The point of order would just be a procedural thing. He has not done anything wrong in procedure.
I understand, but we're getting off on the wrong foot.
No, you may comment later, and I'll let you do that. But
We're
right now,
be spending a lot
this
of
is
time
Dr.
spinning our
Auger's
wheels.
report. So I will let him continue.
Because it's not $2.7 million.
No, Mr. Mudge, you may comment later.
We submitted a budget
No,
to the
Mr.
town
Mudge,
council of
I said
$58,732,000.
This is the
That's the budget.
superintendent's presentation. You do not get to comment right now.
Be quiet.
So what I'm prepared to do for you tonight is to go through this list, and what I'd like to do first is talk to you a little bit about how it's organized. The first section that is outlined kind of in orange color is changes in expenditures, and some of them are actually revenues since we've last gone over the budget on February 7th. The second section are reductions that I recommend, and that would get us to about $1.2 million in reductions and leave about $1.6 million remaining. The reason that the next section is in red, and you know, I want to talk directly to, you know, Mr. August and Sandy Blankenship, who have spoken about this particular issue. You know, I'm not looking to make any enemies, and I'm not looking to broadcast that this is all ESP's fault. That's not my point. My point here is to point out that we have had a long year with our budget deficit issue, and a few things have come of that. We've had an audit of our school department, and we've also had a lawsuit that we've dealt with. And in both of those cases, the recommendation to us is that you cannot budget with money that you do not have yet. In years past, even on an earlier version of this budget, we would put a line item that would say ESP concessions for $436,000, or another place where more ESP concessions for this much or that much. We can't do that. We also can't, as we have done in years past, or budget with state aid that is not approved yet by the legislature. That was an issue for us last year where that number changed. And so we cannot do that. So right now, in years past, some of these numbers I could have placed in our budget, that these were assumptions that I felt we were going to have, and the list would be a lot less. But I can't do that tonight, because that would be against the way we're supposed to be doing things. So we're going to do things right, and we're going to go through this list, and I will explain to you why everything is here. The issue with the red has to do with assumptions that I don't know with certainty that they are going to come in the way that I am projecting them. I expect that they will, and I hope that they will, but that is all I have right now. And what I expect is approximately $1 million in concessions after the ESP arbitration is done to apply for next year. Last year, we had a problem with what we expected, because we expected over $500,000 in base after what we had budgeted. That didn't come to fruition because we're still going through negotiations right now. And we had a deficit to deal with, and we had a lawsuit from the town, and we had a lot of back and forth and a lot of energy taken to deal with this. And we're still not done. We're still in court. So we can't do that again. So I have to put these in front of the school committee as cuts and hope that by the end of June, we will have heard from the legislature that the governor's recommendation has been approved for $581,000, and that after all is said and done with ESP negotiations, which I expect to happen in June or by June, that we will realize the other number that I just mentioned, and that we can take these items off of the list. So tonight, you know, there's going to be a discussion about whether we approve this list right now and then draw back once we know the numbers as they come in June, or whether we just wait till June and find out what those numbers are. If I can point to the list, I'm just going to try to go through each item pretty briefly so that people can understand the context. One of the first pieces of this, and Mr. August pointed this out, is that last year we got into trouble, and as in many years. Mr. August talked about 8 or 9 years ago when the Bacon and Edge report recommended against the way we've been budgeting for food service, that we expect a deficit, but we don't mention it. Well, we need to mention it. And right now, conditions as they are, we are expecting $186,000 in deficit from food service. We have to budget for that. So before I can do anything to find revenue or to cut one program, I have to add $186,000 to that $2.7 million. If 2.7 isn't bad enough, we have to add $186,000. If the cafeteria situation should change, I can take that off, but I can't right now. So we have to account for it. The FICA savings, some of these are pretty small items, so I'm going to, go through them relatively quickly. These are just, a lot of accounting issues that we've been able to realize some savings here and there. Director of Administration, for instance, is between salary and benefits is a $5,000 savings over what Mr. Draper had. Health insurance went up. Dental insurance went down. Breakage, we were expecting to break the money that is the difference between an outgoing teacher and a new teacher. We were expecting to have 6 retirees. We had 9. So that's money that we did not expect that we got. We just approved a service agreement with Block Island. It's bringing us $18,000 to the good. We realized that we did not budget for the CORI requests that we do for volunteers. Those are criminal offender record investigations that are done through our links office. So we need to budget for that. The homework club and the internship program, those things are happening. They're just paid for through other items we have realized. So it's kind of redundant. It's money that we had budgeted for that we do not need to budget for. So those are savings. The non-public text, that's non-funded in the governor's budget, so we expect that it's going to cost us $15,000. And the difference between the outgoing assistant principal at Wickford Middle School and the new assistant principal at Wickford Middle School is approximately $3,000 in savings, possibly more depending on how that person chooses for their health insurance option. So that all totaled adds $105,000 to this already $2,700,000. So the cuts that I've put together, or reductions, whatever word you want to choose, most of these are reductions. There are a couple of adds, and I will explain those as well, are not exactly prioritized, but generally prioritized. The items near the top of the list I feel are a lot easier to do than the items at the bottom of the list. And that's generally how I'm working with this right now. The first is, we talked about this, the perspectives at Davisville Elementary. I know, Mr. Welch, you would ask for some specific numbers about that. I just received some today, and I will be getting them to you very soon. They exceed $100,000, so I'm happy to report that. We are looking to transfer 2 full-time FTE full-time equivalent from a .2, that is basically 1 class from physical education to tech readiness at Davisville Middle School. That is something that Principal Logan told me that it would be helpful to her in her scheduling. We are looking that in an area where we no longer need 2 elementary teachers at particular schools because of enrollment changes, that we would transfer 1 to a literacy coordinator for the district, which we feel is definitely needed, and 1 social worker. The social worker piece is something that we have had on this on the budget for the last 3 years that I've been here, and I'm hoping that this year it sticks and we can do that. Because we would be looking to hire a literacy coordinator, we would not need the 3 literacy coordinators that we each pay $3,000 for. I think that's actually, and so that's roughly $9,000. The cut stipends, that's that was money that we had spent a few years ago for the nurses when we had the flu epidemic issues. We haven't had anything like that for a while, and that's money that we realize we can save. Again, these are kind of easy things. Some of them don't really amount to a heck of a lot of money. We already did the supervisor of the physical plant. That savings of $68,000 results from the full-time salary and benefits totaling over $100,000 to a part-time 19-hour person at a roughly $37,000 with FICA and Medicare, and so the savings there is about $68,600, and that's an item that we may be looking at some kind of a reorganization and consolidation effort with the town. So there may be more savings to be found there as we move along, but we just don't know yet. When we had originally approved this, we had approved money for a reorganization where certain people were getting some stipends to be a kind of a foreman. That never really took shape. Any extra work that we've asked people to do, we've paid through overtime and have continued to save a lot of money doing it that way. But so this is $21,000 that we will not be needing. We are reducing maintenance supplies by $25,000. Mr. Merkel right now makes $7,000 to be an energy manager. I'm proposing that that stipend go away, and that we have the whatever reorganization that we do with the maintenance, with the new physical plant person, that we assign those duties to that person. The employee severance is money that was more than we needed, so we're going with more actual number. So there's a savings of roughly $10,000. Clerical overtime is another number that there was money there that we didn't necessarily need, and some of it is just a drawback on services. There will just be less clerical overtime. Reduced district-wide substitutes for professional development. That is a significant difference there, $20,000. That means there will be some professional development efforts that we cannot do because we cannot pay for subs for teachers to leave their classroom. We would cut the paraprofessional mentor coordinator. This is not really a cut. That is still happening. However, we've been paying for it out of our district-wide PD budget, not out of this line, so it's an area that we feel we can cut. The advanced placement professional development, we had budgeted roughly $8,000 for that in the past year, and we only used about $6,000, and it was a pretty heavy year. So I'm cutting it back to the actual figure, saving $2,000. The student planners at the high school, I feel like it is worth trying this out. I know a number of students use these planners, but many report that they do not. And with so many students having smartphones and with calendars and organizers built in, I think the need for that may be a little less right now. The equipment district-wide and the supplies district-wide, those are, cuts that you make in tough times. Those are things that we need, but we're going to do a lot of belt-tightening here, and I'd rather work in those areas before we go to personnel and to programs directly affecting kids. The next two items are buses. We can cut one bus for $60,000. We can cut two for $120,000. It's not a typo there. They're both there, but the second one is important. The second one will likely affect our bell times, in that because we're going to have more kids on every bus, it probably means that we'll probably have to start the high school maybe 5 minutes earlier and start the middle and elementary schools maybe 5 minutes later. And if we get into the red area and have another bus involved, we could go a little bit longer than that. So that's something I would prefer not to do, but again, tough budgetary times, I'd rather do that than to start cutting staff and essential services to kids. Reduce summer guidance. We normally have paid some overtime for our guidance counselors to help with scheduling. I'm feeling that with Aspen, our programming, that hopefully we can be a little bit better prepared for that and cut a little bit of our summer guidance. This is I'm going to guess 20% of it right now. So maybe we can do it with a little bit less than that. We've already reorganized the athletic director position. Mr. Marcello's position has been reduced to include teachers with part of their day working 2 at the high school, and then a small stipend for each middle school, and that would save us $54,000. Freshman sports are included there. I feel that's one of the easiest sports reductions, and this is a year that we have to go in this direction. And this is we have a very vibrant program in sports in North Kingstown, but there are a lot of school districts that do not have freshman sports. We have a full complement of JV and varsity sports, so I feel that's an area that we can absorb. The next area is a little bit tougher. It includes teams that I know certain students and parents in this district really love. And it breaks my heart to have to go down this road, but and why these were chosen has to do with participation and cost. And then after that, I have to consider Title IX issues, the fact that you need to have the same number of options for girls as you do for boys in sports. So there are an equal number of those teams. These particular teams have lower participation rates and higher costs, and that's why they were chosen. It has nothing to do with my personal love or dislike for any particular sport. Reduce 40% of music, theater, drama supplies, and reduce after-school music program costs by 25%. These two areas, I feel, are probably areas that, with the help of the music staff in our district, that we can find ways to find these costs through fundraising efforts or by being creative. particularly number 37, I kept it kind of general with programming costs. That isn't any one specific person or any one specific concert or any one specific show of any kind. It's we'll look at this and we'll find a way to figure it out. So I would welcome that conversation with our music staff. The part-time clerk at Davisville Middle School, this is the person who just, in fact, retired this evening. That part of that job, half of that job, would go to the front office at Quidness Elementary. And then a reduction in .2 of study skills at Davisville Middle School. This is a class that a lot of people would call enrichment. With the movement of the PE to the tech, we're feeling that number 14, we're feeling that this becomes a little more doable. So there's some savings there. The e-portfolio coordinator .4, this would begin, and I'm going to work with Dr. Kenworthy to look at this very closely. If we can retain some kind of portfolio through the Aspen system, we will. If not, we would look at reorganizing our proficiency-based graduation requirement where kids are still doing this kind of work, but they're not necessarily storing it on this software, which can be expensive, and then have a person to oversee the software and the students working to upload this work. Instead, it will be tracked somehow differently, whether it's similar to the way grades are tracked or some other method. But we would still require the kids to do essentially the same work. They have graduation requirements after all, but some of the overhead for the technology and the person involved to oversee that piece of it would go away with this. The reason it's not a full reduction is because there are still kids in the system who are going through this program and are using it right now, namely our juniors for next year. So that person would still stay on .6 to see through that, but this would include a non-renewal of the software for the following year. So this would be kind of a one-year phase-out. The reduction of the .5 librarian and the .5 library clerk at North Kingstown High School, I know that's been something that people have come to the mic a number of times about. I certainly see the importance of library. However, I'm also seeing a very extensive list that contains many other teachers, namely 2.4 more teachers at North Kingstown High School, some at the middle school and some at the elementary level. And I believe that this is a reduction that we need to make before we go to some of the other ones. I feel that still having 1.5 librarians at the high school, while it will be very difficult to work under those conditions after years of working with essentially 3 people, it is something that we need to do. It's not a matter of do I like this or do I not like it. It's a matter of setting priorities, and if I don't do this, then what else do I need to do to obtain that kind of money? And I don't have an answer to that right now. So I need to have that on the list, I feel. The reduction in .2 Davisville and .2 Wickford foreign language, those are items that I have spoken to our middle school principals about, and I feel that we can absorb that. Reduction in substitute teachers district-wide, $50,000. Some of that is money that we have not used recently, so I'm hoping that we can make it work, but some of it is going to be a stretch. So we're going to have to kind of see how that works out, but one way or another, it's going to come up to $50,000. At Wickford Middle School is a reduction in enrollment significant in 6th grade, where I feel that we can easily absorb going from 6th grade teachers to 5. At Davisville Middle School, there is not I'm not sure there's much of a reduction at all. I thought there was in February, but it's looking like that may not be much of a reduction. However, there would still be fewer students per class in 6th grade at Davisville Middle School than there would be at Wickford Middle School. The cap is 28. We would be looking at 24 in a class at Davisville Middle School and 26 in a class at Wickford Middle School under this reduction. Those are the kinds of reductions we've made at all the elementary schools, and we do this at the high school as well when those kinds of numbers come up. So I feel that we need to be doing this, particularly when the list is so extensive. We need to find these opportunities. As many of you know, special education situations take place where we need to act, and I've been informed, and this is after combing through every paraprofessional that we have, that we do need to add one special ed paraprofessional to our staff next year for IEP purposes. I've talked with Dr. Kenworthy, and we have looked at all of our electives. The NATO-Wadovic report mentioned this piece as well, particularly with foreign language, that there are a number of classes that because they're either a singleton or because the number kind of gets close to the minimum enrollment that we usually run a class, that we run it anyway, we're going to have to do less of that. This will mean there will be 12 different classes out of a pretty large high school, so 12, relatively speaking, is not a heck of a lot, but there will be 12 sections of electives that would not run with this item number 47, and that would be left to the high school administration to figure out as kids enroll for classes. For instance, if say, Portuguese 4, for instance, run as 10 kids, in the past we might have run that class. In the future, we would not. And we've had situations in the past where kids for French 5, for instance, have had to find, because of very low enrollment, have had to find another way to get that learning. And that's part of the belt tightening, unfortunately. So you have a minimum enrollment number, and we're going to do more to stick to that minimum enrollment number. There's a cut in another cut in an elementary teacher. Overall, we were able to find 9 areas where we could reduce at a certain grade level at a certain school between the elementary and middle. And there were another 4 areas where we felt that we needed to add at a certain level. That left 5. Out of those 5, there is the transfer to the literacy and the social worker. There are the 2 teachers at Davisville and Wickford, and then there is this elementary teacher. That's a district-wide item. I don't know specifically which school that would be right now. And then what I would like to do, and I see this as even though it's an ad, I see this as something that I certainly expect will save us money. We have talked a lot, and we've even acted, this committee has acted early in the year to have an approach to bringing in private money. So we have to do less of this kind of thing in future years, where we can sell advertising space on those nice newly painted dugouts at Wickford Middle School, for instance. Just talk to someone who's interested in advertising on those. And doing some other things in our basketball court or on our football field with banners. We have allowed for that. We have an RFP out there for people to take advantage of that, but it's not happening yet. And I feel it's not happening because we haven't really been aggressive about it. We don't have a person that is assigned to going out there and hustling and getting these partnerships. I would like to have a business partnerships coordinator paid the same salary as our part-time buildings and grounds person. And this person would have basically 3 responsibilities as I see it. One would be to create business partnerships for advertising purposes and to bring revenue into this district, whether that has to do with sports or the arts or any other field, technology, those kinds of things. I think there's a lot to be found. Grant writing would be involved. Bringing in private dollars would be involved in that regard. The second thing would be to coordinate at the high school career pathways. We are in one of the industrial hubs of New England with Quonset Point in North Kingstown itself. That is in our town. And we do have some connections with them, and the high school has done a good job with that. But in my opinion, I envision a school district that has a lot more connected to them, and that we have career pathways where students can work through different courses at North Kingstown High School. And we have an agreement with some of the businesses, say at Quonset Point, or other businesses in North Kingstown or the local area, where if they complete certain coursework, keep their grades in order, keep their attendance and their behavior in order, that they then become eligible for internships at places like EB and Torrey and other major businesses that are in this area. And again, what we need is someone to spearhead that effort, make those connections with Quonset Point and other local businesses, and to start, down that road. And in that partnership, I can see where those kinds of businesses would be, funding some of the technology in our schools, advertising in our schools, and bringing revenue to our schools. So my proposal in adding that piece is that after 1 year, if that doesn't produce $37,678 dollars in revenue, then we pull it. But I think it's worth a try, and I hope the school committee will approve that. Going to page 2, the next round of cuts, again, these are what I expect and what I hope, but they're not guarantees, and because I don't have a guarantee, I can't budget for it yet. So I have to include this on the list of cuts. Further reduction in maintenance supplies. Again, this goes kind of in an order of what I see as things that I can most easily do to things that are toughest to do. But again, we're in the red right now, so everything's tough. We have web page coordinators at every school. I think they're very important and very helpful in us communicating well with the community. That will be something that we would have to absorb somehow. The dues for the school committee is something that, I think that some of us on the school committee definitely do use this, and I cannot certainly understand why we wouldn't go down this road. But, again, it's another area that I felt is worth putting on our list. Reducing summer guidance some more. You remember on the other page that was about $5,000. This is the rest of it, about $18,750. And that would really put a crimp in our ability to service kids who need guidance counselors in the summer. We currently do have guidance counselors coming into the summer by contract, but the guidance staff can tell you that it's usually not quite enough, and there's usually a panic, particularly around getting schedules out, that precipitates us using some extra money to make sure that the work gets done. We would have a hard time. Next 3 areas are all custodial related. The .5 weekend custodian, that would probably require, in order to get this back, a major increase in fees to outside groups. This would affect the North Kingstown Rec and our ability to open buildings and take care of buildings on the weekends. Another 2 custodians shared by the high school and middle school, and then 1 district-wide after that. I don't know specifically, I don't have any one particular name in mind or person in mind, but this would probably mean that a number of schools would be sharing custodians. And this is, I think, we're as tight as we need to be right now for custodians. So going here would mean that our buildings don't get cleaned as often, and they're not looking as good as we have been expecting them to look all along. So this would be tough. Another bus, again, very tough. This will affect bell times again. Maintenance repairs to our buildings. All of these items, the cleanliness and the maintenance of our buildings would suffer with this going to this extent on our budget. Professional development stipends by 75%. Our schools all get an allocation for professional development. I think we've been pretty well funded in that regard, and we've seen results because we've been well funded in that regard. We do a lot of good things, and our teachers improve, and our coordinated efforts improve because of the money we've spent in that area, and so that's going to be a significant hit. The next areas have to do with music, reducing by 1 elementary music teacher. I talked with Ms. Silvera today about, the possibility, if we cut that, could there be some kind of reshuffling of the remainder of the music staff that possibly we could still get some of that teaching in. I'm open to that, but I think, I know that we've made it a point that everything in regards to after-school music and to the 5th grade piece have to come on the table once you get to this deep in the budget area. So it's not something that I can really ignore here. And so, I think a number of these things, if they go away, we'd have to look at reorganizing and trying to figure out the best way that we can get something close to the service that we currently have now with fewer dollars, and that would be something related to this as well. We would also be looking at the remaining middle and high school sports. I've talked with a number of school committee members, and I would certainly like to explore the options if we have to go this far. I don't think we will, but if we have to go this far, of finding ways to fund our sports privately. That does not mean pay to play, because that's illegal, where you require, if a kid doesn't come up with a payment, they don't play for a team. But we do have some precedent in this district for allowing teams to privately fund, and we would have to do a lot more in that regard. And again, that business partnerships person could be an instrumental role in doing that. Just some savings for ads on fences at our baseball fields or our football fields, that sort of thing, could bring some of the money we need just to bring some of those teams back that are listed in the green. We're not talking always hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sometimes we're talking about $3,000 to get a team funded, or $5,000, something like that. So perhaps there are some options, but it is certainly not something I'm advocating for, and certainly not something that I want to do, trust me. If we do not have an athletic program, we do not need an athletic director, so the remaining athletic director salary would then go with this. The after-school resource center is something that would probably go, as all after-school functioning would be going, as is the late bus. After that, there are very essential teaching items that I, quite frankly, would have a very hard time doing without. But again, this is how drastic we are at the end of this long and exhaustive $2.7 million worth of cuts. And that would include building para support. This is not special education support paras, but much needed nonetheless at Davisville Middle School, Hamilton, and .5 at Quidnesset. Right now there's a person that's funded half through title funds and half through district funds. And this would, that person would go and have used the title funds in another capacity. The reduction in 4 paraprofessional staff district-wide, the reason it's listed as district-wide is that because right now I do not know specifically where they would come from. So there are issues around that. The student assistance counselors, that one also breaks my heart. This is an area that we have cut back in this district. These are counselors that help particularly around drug and alcohol education at the middle schools and the high school. This would be a very difficult cut, whereas we know many of our students need this support. And then, obviously, if we get down to this final point, then that literacy support person that I am hoping to gain and the social worker would also go. And that would get us to 0. The state aid and revenue numbers are listed. I see the state aid as coming through as 581, and I see the ESP concessions, when all is said and done, totaling a little over $1 million. And if those come to fruition, and as they come to fruition, then that would equal the same amount that is in that red area. And we could pull back on all of those more drastic reductions, or if by the time they do become realized, the committee senses that there are other things that have come into the mix and we reprioritize a little bit, it could be just about anything that comes back. But as far as, my particular proposal right now, this is how I would prioritize. I want you all to know that this is probably the toughest thing that I have done in this job, is trying to figure out how to get to that number from where we are. There's not too much more that, in fact, I was looking at my staff the other day saying, where else do I have any options at all? There's not much more that I even have at my discretion to be cutting. And believe me, the staff that we have cut are very essential staff, and I don't want to do without them. But I'm forced to put this in front of the school committee. The sports program, the music program, I believe my vision of a great school district is one that includes all of these options for kids. I don't want to cut back on them at all, and I'm going to do everything I can through private funding or any other way to get those things back in the mix. But for right now, this is where we are. And so that's what I have to say about that. The one other item that I have is currently, and this is being debated with the town, and we are still in court with them, but right now we have a fund balance that is in the neighborhood of $1 million. And the easy answer to a lot of this is to say, why don't we just use that? The answer to that is it makes sense to use fund balance when you're covering capital projects. And my recommendation is to move $300,000 of our fund. It is recommended that we have about 1.2 in our fund balance. Right now we have about $1 million. It is my recommendation tonight that we move $300,000 to our CIP, Our CIP this year was not funded by the town, once again. For many years now, it has not been funded. In fact, it was reported at the meeting that we did not even approve our own CIP or prioritize that. That is misinformation. That is out there. We did do that. We did that on September 27th and went to asset management with it, and we did everything we were supposed to do. And so, but we were not approved for any additional money to that. So a lot of times, as you know, this spring we got criticized for, why do you always have to go to a bond to get money to maintain our buildings? That's the reason why. There's no money in that pool. Right now, I'm at the point of dealing with grievances from our teachers over a couple of issues. One, dealing with the heat issue on the third floor of the high school, and I would like to start addressing that with about $100,000 worth of air conditioning and keep chipping away at that over the years. I think it's impossible to get to all of it right away, obviously, but I think using CIP money for that makes some sense. And also, I feel that there are very important technology needs in this district. One that's just come to my attention this week is we got a very problematic server over at Stony Lane that needs to be replaced. It's about $7,000. There are a number of smart board items that through grant money that had been, we had attained, and I and Dr. Thornton made some promises to include smart boards for the teachers that participated in that. We're about two-thirds through with that, but we still have a number to go. So whereas using fund balance to pay for things that you have every year, like teachers and paraprofessionals, is not recommended, because the following year you don't have that money, but you have to renew a teacher now that you've come to depend on. So using fund balance for those kinds of things does not make sense. It's called a structural deficit when you do that. But using fund balance to transfer to a CIP, where you're going to do a one-time purchase and get a long-term bang for your buck out of it, that does make more sense. So I'm going to recommend that we transfer $300,000 to that, and in a meeting coming up this spring, I will make recommendations to spend roughly $200 of that $300,000 on those two projects in particular, the technology and the air conditioning. So that is my recommendation for tonight. I know there will be a lot of discussion. I would imagine there will be a few people from the audience who may want to come up and comment on some of these things as well. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Dr. Ajay, what are you asking for the school committee to do tonight?
I'm asking for the approval of what is in orange and what is in green. I know there will be some discussion over the red, and I'm torn about that. As much as I feel that this is something that needs to be done, I've thought about this. I know that some members of our committee have debated about this. I feel that this is something that I would prefer to wait on until we hear about these, see the end of the negotiations as long as we can. I don't believe we can wait beyond July 1st. We have to make decisions by then. But I think those items I would prefer to wait on. I think the important task tonight is that I and the school committee be honest with the community about what these numbers mean, and that these things are in the mix, and that to get the revenue for these things, we need the ESP negotiations to come through the way they are, and we need that state aid to come through the way it is. In years past, we would have budgeted for that and not even blinked. Now we cannot do that anymore. So we still have a problem, but I'd rather do it that way than to vote on the red tonight and have that already approved and then have to come back and withdraw. I think either way, there are problems in terms of job fair coming up and the movement of teachers, but I think I prefer not to go the route of approving the red and alarming the whole community until we absolutely have to, and knowing for sure what those numbers are. There's going to come a point. We have our last meeting for the school committee is June 27th. If we don't hear from the legislature before then, we may have to have an emergency meeting right after then, before July 1st. But I think I'd prefer to do these cuts once we know for sure what those numbers are and work from there. So I'm recommending that you approve this section on the first page, the items that are in orange and the items that are in green, tonight.
All right, so the superintendent is asking that we approve the items in the orange and the green. And I will make the motion that we do approve the items in the orange and the green. Will I get a second?
Second.
We now open this up for discussion. I'm going to go down the table. Mr. Mudge, I see your hand up. I also want Mrs. Held, Mr. Avanzato, to know that you are more than welcome to speak on any of these also, okay? So if you'd like, I can actually start with you and come up the table. I'm going to give each committee member 3 minutes. Then at the end, when everybody has had a chance to speak, then if the committee feels as if you want to still have more discussion, we can, or at that time, we can take citizens' comments on this before we, we have to take citizens' comments because it's a work session before we take any vote. So the question will then be if you want to have more discussion before you take citizens' comments, or if we're ready to take citizens' comments at that time. Mr. Avanzato.
I just had a brief question for the superintendent, actually, about some of the numbers that I was looking at. And while I've, until recently, been under the impression that the school had gotten a 2% increase, I was reading something that stated that while the 2% increase went to increase the town's general fund by, I had $1,200,000 roughly, the school fund was still decreased by over $600,000 by the town council. Now, does that mean that there's actually $600,000 less than last year, even counting for inflation, or am I mistaken in that?
I'm going to ask Mrs. King to talk a little bit about this. But, last year's appropriation was $58,092,043, and this year's appropriation is less. You're right. And that is even with a 2% increase, and that means that there are other areas, specifically things like the use of fund balance in recent years that was needed, but now we can't rely on that money, and that's the structural deficit thing that I talked about, and a few other items that have come in that, the gap gets wider. You would think the gap would get smaller, but and that speaks to the level of need that we've had when we have pointed out that we really do need a 4% increase here to keep up. It sounds like a 2% increase, that should make it easier, and it does. It's certainly better than zero, but the gap still can even widen even with that. I'll let Mrs. King talk a little bit about that.
Actually, I think if you go back to that and you total those numbers, it's not $642,000, it's $800,000. Those numbers are incorrect. But it is like Dr. Auger said, yes, we did receive an increase from the town, but there are other areas that have decreased, and that is continuing to have our deficit, require us to make cuts.
Do you have any other questions, Mr. Avanzato?
I think that's about it. I was just curious, because so then you were saying that they actually did increase the amount of money from last year in terms of what was appropriated by the town?
By the town, correct. But there are other areas that have decreased, and the use of the fund balance that Dr. Auger mentioned. So when you put all of that together, we did get an increase from the town appropriation, but the other reductions are still contributing to that $800,000 reduction from the prior year.
Okay, thank you. I think that's about it for what I have.
All right, Mrs. Held.
I don't think I have comments now other than to note that all of the discussion and all the controversies about town suing school and all the budget issues that you face this year certainly increase the number of emails I get from Jamestown parents, and I do think make some of the issue about us all having a harder time predicting how many students are going to come here more of a challenge as they make cuts, as you have to make cuts at the high school level.
Mr. Mudge.
Would you pass those handouts on, please? I take a little bit different perspective on the budget. Thank you, Mr. King. It was $624,000 more, okay, to be precise. I have here in my hand, I think I passed this out at the last school committee meeting, that, in fact, the state aid, and this is the way state aid works, by the way. If you look at 16.2, the Department of Education generally has a responsibility to tell you what state aid you're going to get. But they made an amendment in that and said they don't have to do it until the governor, submits his budget. Well, the governor this year submitted his budget for $10,812,000. That's what should be in our budget. That's what the town put in their budget. But the town reduced it for quite a good reason. And that is some $138,000 more than we had, by the way, in 2011. So that will change or be approved. And traditionally, the General Assembly has always increased the Department of Ed's, the governor's allocation for funding to the state. So we're going to be in that $10.8 million range pretty closely. So what I've done here is, what I try to do is go back and look at, we sent a budget that we were happy with to the town council in the amount of $58,737,000. This committee sent that budget to the town council. Suppose the town council and all this money came back up, that we got the $58 million, 737. Where would we be? What would we be doing here? What would we be doing here tonight? Well, the difference between the $58,737,000 we sent and requested the town council to provide, they gave us $57,243, or roughly $5 million, $1.5 million less than we requested. So how do we make that up? How about $624,000? We're probably going to get that from the state. So it is $600,000 we're getting back. I submit we should use the $1 million in surplus we have. Before we start cutting football, baseball, basketball, all the sports or music, anything else, we don't need $1 million surplus, and we shouldn't have a surplus. Okay? We shouldn't. And by the way, the town council has authorized more than almost $18 million, like $18 million for repairs and fixes and things for the schools since 2002. Okay? $18 million. So let's not say they're not funding the maintenance and repairs to our schools, because they have been. Okay? Now, with that said, we have $1.4 million, $1.5 million to make up. Well, $624,000 we're going to most likely get from the state, and I think we can pretty much bank on that, plus or minus $50,000, maybe even $100,000. We got $1 million in surplus. We can apply that. That's $1.6 million right there. Those two items alone bring us back to the funding amount that we requested the council. So we're going to sit on $1 million, okay, and say we're not going to, we're going to kill sports, and even and it's, we're going to wipe it out. We're going to wipe out music and all these other things, and some of them need to be done. There's no question about that. But there are some other things that we can do to recognize savings this year. That is close Wickford Davisville Elementary School. By closing Davisville Elementary School, we can save $200,000. Just got to look at the numbers. We put the green school in there, we're losing money. Why do I say that? We're going to pay for all the maintenance and operations for the building. It's part of our plan. Well, do you know something? When Davisville Elementary School was in operation, full operation 3 years ago, it was costing us between $200,000 and $250,000 for maintenance and operation and utilities. We're only charging $1 million.
Mr. Mudge, you have had 5 minutes out
I've
of
got
the 3.
I've done a lot of homework here, so I'd like to finish, please. Okay?
Would the
Because
committee
this is
give
this
Mr.
is
Mudge another minute?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So this is an area, by taking the folks or the programs that we have in Wickford or Davisville Elementary School, and finding another place to put these functions, okay? We could take the, quote, the new in-house function for the kids from 18 to 21, we can place them at the high school. We don't have to put them over at Davisville Elementary School. By doing that, we don't have to be in Davisville Elementary School. We can save $200,000. The town can always rent out the building, fine. So that's money in the bank. $70,000 in our budget that we get for rentals and so forth is not in the budget. There's another $70,000. I submit, I'm including this in here to get up to this sum, $120,000, like Mr. Ojay said, okay, for additional retirements. That's additional revenues, okay? Bonuses, $30,000. Occupants, okay? Excuse me, how about Jamestown revenues? $262,000. We're going to lay teachers off. We're going to cut sports. We negotiated a poor contract with Jamestown by not having them pay for the bond debt service. I have no problem with Jamestown, the community, or the kids, or their school committee. We negotiated a poor contract. Those kids come into this building and don't pay a penny.
You were given 5 minutes, and you
Okay.
Actually, you were given 3 minutes, and you've now taken 6.
Well, you know, this is a $64 million budget. We can only spend 3 minutes on it.
I will ask if you wrap up your comments here
All right,
as you've
fine.
done.
I said everything I'm going to say.
Mrs. Benson.
Item 49.
Yes.
The importance of this as related to kids getting the work, the jobs outside. Could you give me a reason why you're giving 19 hours and no benefits? Are we paying favorites? We just gave 20 hours last week and benefits to a person who has left the system. That's number one. Do you understand what I'm saying, Mr. West?
There was no benefits.
Mr. Draper?
No benefits.
Oh, yes, that was part of his thing. Benefits.
There's no benefits to Mr. Draper.
There was pension costs.
That's not,
There were no benefits other than that.
Pension costs is benefits.
I'm sorry, you
Okay.
stand corrected, Mrs. Benson.
Pension costs is part of
I
benefits.
stand corrected.
And that was reduced from the salary item.
Okay. Well, at any rate, I'd like to know, and you talked quite at length about the importance of the business partnership.
Yes.
And I think I've spoken many times about the business partnership and the mathematics skills and the reading skills that's been expressed to me by two of their largest employees, and that's Torrey and Electric Boat. And for your information, to join that army is job lot. But you can't see this person only getting 19 hours a week. Was that to avoid benefits? When we have a person working in another system and we are giving them benefits? And yet we
My
have-
understanding, Mrs. Benson, in doing that is that I feel there has been a push on this committee that if we're going to add staff, that we're going to do the best we can to keep the costs low. If I feel that after a year, and if the committee feels that after a year, that we want to expand on this because we see it as so successful and want to add to it, I think we could do that at that point. But I think for right now, I'd like to start here. I think I could, keep the cost of this as low as possible. I think it's more likely to take root, and that's the reason I went in this regard.
Well, the reason I asked you the question is because I was so thrilled at you saying how these programs could benefit. But yet it sticks out like a sore thumb, the 19 hours. And another one I wanted to ask you about is the organized athletic directors. And also, why did we approve contracts for our professional staff, principals, yours and the other, before we worked on the budget? And we knew we were going to have cuts. That has been mentioned ever since last fall. So it looks as if take care of us and to hell with the children. And I cannot vote on a budget that cuts so many things from the children and education. So I will not be voting for your recommended cuts.
Well, I'm sorry to hear you say that, Mrs. Benson. I think
sorry
the
that
evidence
you made it
proves me
so.
out that our administrators have taken significant cuts, including a zero this year. So, you know, I resent the fact that you would say such things about our administrators. They're great people, and they have taken cuts like everybody else, and they have a time every year where their contracts need to be renewed, and we follow that just like we do with everybody else in the district. So to single them out as somehow the criminals in all of this, with your statement, I take that. I don't take that too kindly. I don't think that's what you meant to say, and I hope that's not what you meant to say. But to blame them for this budget is the wrong thing.
Way of trying to put down what I am saying, because you have some top-notch administrators, and I have mentioned that several times. But my question to you was, why did you renew those contracts? What we have been hearing...
The school committee renews the contracts every year around the end of March. That is what the agreement that we have on the contracts for when they need to be renewed. An administrator, if they don't have a contract renewed until the very last minute in June, they may not have a job. They don't have that job security like everybody else in the district has.
I don't see
so
much job
if their contract runs up, they're done. So they need some time to look for another job if we're not going to renew them. So we have put in their contracts, and this is standard operating procedure for so many districts, and in many districts it's more time, where administrators need a notice if their contract is not going to be renewed so that they can find another job. I think that's only fair.
Well, I think it's fair to a certain extent. But I think the most unfairness we can do is to deprive our kids of a basic education.
Nobody's doing that.
Well, that's your viewpoint, and this is mine. Thank you.
Mr. Busgarden.
Ms. Page, I'll be brief since I feel that I gave Bill Mudge a minute, so I'll take it off of mine.
You don't need to do that. I'll give everybody
that's only
3
fair.
minutes and then flex on.
Dr. Ozier, I really like the idea of number 49. I think that's a great idea. Anytime we can do things that are going to generate income, potentially generate income, is great. Anytime we can help kids that are not necessarily on the path to college is great. If we can do them both with the same, at the same time, that's even better. I'm very troubled about 41 and 42. I have a soft spot for libraries. I learned a lot when I was a kid in my library. In fact, if it wasn't for a couple librarians, I may not have gotten my college degree. They kept me on the right path, and I'm sure you're aware of that. I'm sure you know how many students this library services. You don't need to be told that. My wish is that if money is made available, that would be at the top of the list to restore as soon as possible. Thank you. Oh, and I do support your wish to vote the green today, the green and the orange. I fully support that.
Mrs. Avanzado.
Well, obviously, these are devastating cuts. No one's preference, none of them are our preference. None of them are Dr. Auger's preference, but we have a list we have to choose from. Pretty much, I think you're seeing pretty much a lot of the discretionary funding that we have right here on this sheet. There's a large portion of it. In terms of what we should do tonight, whether or not we should go to the red tonight or we should wait, frankly, Mr. August, the previous head of the audit committee, urged us not to rely on things we don't know about. We have no idea whether we're going to be getting state aid and how much we're going to be getting. You don't know what's happening in this state, and we just have no way of knowing that. So it concerns me a little bit to just wait, and also, we've been warned by the town council. They basically cut, or they funded this budget at a certain level, and said they weren't going to speculate on things like the jobs money and those things, and they cut those out. So it does concern me, although I do understand that we're in difficulty either way in terms of letting people know so that they're going to be getting pink slips, or not telling them until the last minute is almost just as bad. So really we are in a dilemma with that, and I just wait and hear from the rest of the committee members. Some just general comments that I wanted to make is that, both of our boards, the town council and the school committee, we're in the same place. We have a difficult job to do. We have a limited amount of funds. They've been getting smaller every year for both sides, and we're trying to preserve services with what we have. The town's job is basically to set the amount of funding that comes to the schools. And I fully understand that, support that that's their job, but I'm disappointed in some of the rationale that they gave to cut our budget that I think was somewhat unfair. Not saying we haven't made a few mistakes up here. I think we've tried to reverse some of those mistakes. I would venture a guess that the council's made a few mistakes, but maybe they don't have quite as many people or quite as much scrutiny as we do. Not to make excuses, but I just want to hit on a couple of those things, and that is the comments that our budget is unclear, murky, and some suggestion made that there's money hidden in the budget. I just want to refer to the Wadovic report, which referred to the fact that the current school department budget, and I'm quoting from the report now, is extremely lengthy and cumbersome due to the recent required Uniform Chart of Accounts implementation. Detailed account analysis is difficult and very time-consuming. We noted during our review the school department prepares an extremely detailed budget. The budget book provides various key financial information, including a budget summary, total expenditure summary, total revenue summary, cost per pupil analysis. My point is that, I think that we're doing a fairly good job. I think that for someone to make the comment that they can't read our budget, that's problematic, because Mr. Wadovic says right here, even though it was detailed, it's a little bit cumbersome, it's because it's required to be, and I would think the town council would know that. That's a mandate. So I wanted to refer to that. Dr. Auger already covered the CIP. We did vote on that. So I just wanted to mention that. In terms of a comment made by Mr. Stamm that we sued the town, I wouldn't support doing that. I want to make that clear. And if you read the caption of the court case, it says Town of North Kingstown plaintiffs versus North Kingstown School Committee. We are the defendants. We were sued. We did not sue. I wouldn't choose to do that. At this point, I think, the other point that I wanted to make too is surplus. The fact that we have a surplus at all has been a point of contention. I mean, we had a choice. We could either take that money and put it aside and save it for the rainy day, or we could spend it. And I think we did the right thing in trying to save it, but it seems like there's no right thing. Now, if we put that money in our budget and fund it, as Mr. Mudge suggested, well, that's a huge structural deficit, huge. And we've got a cliff to fall off next year. So where do we go? I don't know, but one way or another, we're going to have to face that cliff at one point. So the bottom line is, what kind of school system do we want to have, and what do the residents support? I don't see a ton of parents out here. I can say that if I were a parent of a young student, I would be in that seat, and I would be very involved, as I have been all the way through my son's education. Not to criticize anyone. Maybe they're not here because they think we're doing a good job. That's what I like to think. I'm deluding myself possibly, but that's what I tell myself. I think this committee has worked very hard. We've outlined it many times what we've done at this table. We've done a lot to cut things over the past 4 years. We've taken what was a 4 to 5% increases and turned that around. And we've done a good job with the contracts that we faced. It's all been spelled out before for the town. We're doing the best that we can with what we've got here and trying to provide an education to the students. Reserve anything further for now.
Mr. Welch?
What a revolting development this is the best way I can describe it. For the last 4 budgets, including this one, we've attempted to take all the low-hanging fruit, as it were, but we're at the top of the tree. There's no more low-hanging fruit. But there's a couple of things I want to clear up because I don't think it's being stated correctly. Not that it's being stated to mislead you, but the town gave us a 2% increase in the town taxpayers' local contribution to education. That's not a 2% increase in our budget. When we presented a budget of 4% increase, that was to the bottom line of the expenses, income to the school district. Those are 2 different items. So if you were going to take what we presented to the town as a 4% budget increase over the current budget, we're receiving approximately $700,000 less than our current budget, which, when you say 2%, it sounds like we did okay because we asked for a 4%, but we asked for 4% over the current budget. That's confusing, I know, but you've got to understand they're 2 different things. The town council has what they call bottom line authority. In essence, they tell us what we can expect to run the school district. What happened with the budget this year is truly the result of the town's legal action against the school district. Judge Stern came out and said to them 2 different times that the bottom line on the budget is the bottom line that the school district has every right to expect from the town. Therein lies the change in this year's budget and what the town gave us. The town, while they don't accept that from the judge, because they're going back for the 3rd time to try and get the judge to change his mind, has decided, well, what are we going to do? We're not going to give them the knowledge that we're going to say, we're going to give you a bottom line that includes this mythical number from the state of Rhode Island. And I say mythical because we have to certify our budget according to the town ordinances the first week in May. But the state doesn't do their budget until, in most cases, the last week in June. How do you budget backwards? That's what we're asked to do. So, you know, the best guess on how to operate a budget is what we did in the past. And any known increases, like in health insurance or pensions, et cetera, plug those in. Any contract increases, you know, labor contracts run 2-3 years generally. We're in the last year in this budget for our teachers. Between steps and increase in the contract, we're $662,000. We can't change that because it's a contract. A couple of years ago, under Governor Kacheri, he proposed a budget to the General Assembly which called for 2 things: a cut in state aid and a corresponding cut in mandates. The General Assembly said, great, we'll cut the state aid. They forgot about the mandates. We keep on getting, in this state, less money going out to pay for the mandates and the education. University of Rhode Island talks about how much money they've lost in state aid over the years. They're pushing it all back on us, the local taxpayers. And I understand no matter where you're going to get the tax from, the state or whatnot, education then falls back on the homeowners and the businesses in the community. You're going to make me stop?
I'll give you one more minute, just as I gave Mr. Mudge and Mrs. Avanzato.
I'm not only going to support the superintendent's orange and green, but I think we also need to show and vote the red. And the reason I say that is the town council didn't give us enough money for anything less than that. It's kind of like setting a table with the knives and the forks and the napkins, but we don't have enough money to pay for the plates yet, folks. And I agree that we'll be putting things back as more money comes, but you know what? You're betting on the come. And if it doesn't come, these cuts are coming. And we started in October, a month before the schedule calls for the town council and the school committee to meet in a joint session. I was chair at the time, and I asked for that to happen because I said to the superintendent, we need to be in front of the public as soon as possible so they know what to expect come May. I don't want any surprises. I don't want anybody to say, how come it's last minute and you're telling us this? We have done everything possible to put it in front of the public and the town council. Now it's up to somebody else to decide where the money's coming from. Thank you.
I just think I told you where the money can come from.
All right. So we have a motion on the floor to approve the orange and green budget. I don't think that this is going to be the end of this discussion tonight. I very well see us coming back later on in either later May or June and having to cut some more, unfortunately. This is like watching that awful movie where the guy gets caught in the crevice and he has to cut off his arm in order to save himself. And I do feel as if I'm in that situation where I have to make all these budget cuts to be able to save what I need the most in the school. And I don't like being in that position. I mean, as I watched that movie, I remember cringing. And that's what I feel like here. I feel like I'm cringing at these cuts. I spent a lot of time with Dr. Auger on Friday. I spent a lot of time with him on Monday, just trying to decide what were the priorities, listening to him talking back and forth on where we wanted to go. And I know most of the rest of the committee came in at some time or another and did the same, of advocating for different things, saying, no, let's do this, that we would all individually bring up what we wanted. I tried to keep Mrs. Held involved with what was going on, as well as Kathy Kaiser over in their committee, to let them know when I saw them at a conference this weekend. So it is not the cuts that I want to make. Matter of fact, I liked your cuts you made on Friday better than the ones today. However, I know this is the way that we have to go. So as much as it pains me to have to make these cuts, to look at librarians, to look at the sports, to look at the music, I still plan on voting for this today. And what I would say is then we take some time, we think about the response that we get from our citizens, and we come back, because I think that we're going to need to let everybody know what's going on. And I think we will be back here, as Mr. Welch has said. We are going to have to cut more, but at least perhaps we'll have more information on our state aid. Perhaps we'll know more of where we have gone legally so that we can make better plans. And I would rather take a long, drawn-out, thoughtful approach until we get to June 30th than to get everybody in a panic and jump ahead. So that would be why my preference would be to vote on this tonight and then wait, because we don't have to do this until June 30th. and we will have to do this at some point. So now everyone on the committee has spoken. Does the committee want to take any more time, or is your preference because we do have a motion on the floor, is your preference to go to citizens' comments?
We can come back after citizens.
Okay. So now, before we take citizens' comments at this time.
Did you say come back after citizens come?
Yes, and so this is what I would ask. The citizens come forward. Please state your name, state your address. This is citizens' comments, so we will listen and we will not comment back. I will give, I have a timer up here that if you haven't heard the little bongs and that sort of thing, that it will basically give you a woodblock sound after 3 minutes, and I would ask that you confine your comments to that time. Thank you.
Hi. Jill Johnen, 102 Sidot Drive. Good evening. I think we really have to look carefully at the impact of these potential cuts on the children. And there's a list here with a number next to them, but what does that mean? And reducing buses, could that mean that children are getting home at 4:30, 4:45 in the evening? Reducing sports, reducing the music program, the clubs, those have huge impact directly on our students. And before we go to those that are having such a severe impact on our kids, we really need to look at some of the other things. I don't know where we stand on this the food service, but we can't keep funding this. If that's something that we're still doing, we have to find a way to outsource this. And if we can if there's an option on the table to come up with something that's cost neutral, we have to do that before taking these cuts and affecting the kids. Consolidation, we really have to work on this. Even this little bit here of the quarry. Volunteers that are in the schools are also volunteering in the town for sports. We do quarries on each one. It's just redundant things. There are so many things in town that the school department and the town does that we have to do it. Even though it's $5,000 here, we have to look at those, and we have to really make a greater effort of consolidating and minimizing these redundancies and saving that money. I think you also have to look here at the ways things are stated. Specifically number 15, it says transfer, but it's not simply a matter of taking elementary teachers. The elementary teachers are being reduced, but it sounds like we're adding an administrator. And we just simply cannot add more administrators. We have the luxury in this town of having an assistant superintendent, which serves the purpose of a lot of the curriculum and other things. And at this point in time, we cannot add any more administrators and at the same time be affecting our children with these direct cuts.
Just to clarify, that would be a teacher role, the literacy.
But is it a classroom? I mean, is that really?
It's someone who would be helping teachers in their classrooms and helping us to coordinate our efforts around reading.
It sounds like an administrative position. So I really urge you to look carefully at number 15 and what it is you are approving on that, and what the benefit to these students are versus some of these other things, versus taking away these sports and clubs and librarians. The other thing is, for years we went with principals and not getting paid in the summertime, and then we changed things, and now the principals got, what was it, 5-6 years ago, and the principals got paid year-round, and, do we really need to have our principals and our clerks in all our schools in July? Can we do away with that and take some of that savings, take away from the administration and save what we have for our children? So please look carefully at these. Do what you can and minimize these direct impact on our children. Thank you.
Again, just to clarify, our principals got cut back 5 or 6 years ago. They were not increased. That's true. Their salaries were cut back.
Hi, good evening. Tony Silvera, 56 Ellis Road. I'm here because even though I understand that you are just voting on the yellow and green, I want the chance to take a moment to speak to you all in the red part, if it comes up to vote later on. Looking at all the cuts that you have to make, I fully understand where before and after school clubs and extracurricular have to come into play. But out of this whole list, the only one curricular spot, part of the curriculum that's being cut, is on 61, reducing a full-time elementary music teacher, which is strings and band. So I'm asking that you relook at this because it is part of the curriculum. So the common sense is if this gets removed and gets put after school, the program will fall apart, which means that if you don't learn it in 5th grade, there will be no band the year after in 6th grade, in 7th grade, and 8th grade, and it's going to disseminate the whole program. So we are willing to do our share. We understand the devastation of the budget right now, but we are asking that you go for our extracurricular items first and not touch our curriculum. And this is such a core part, and I don't know if everyone understands that. So even if one music teacher is cut, you're talking all the elementary schools, so to spread those of us left to go to every elementary school to teach beginning band, I don't know if everything can be covered. And I just see everything that we've built falling apart within just 2 short years. And you can imagine how quickly it can fall apart and how long it takes to build it back up. So that, and also while I'm up here, I also like to speak to the librarians, how important that is at the size of our high school with all the requirements we have with anchor assignments and also senior projects to go down to just one full-time, 1.5 at the size of our school could be devastating too. Thank you.
Thank you.
61 Swanview Lane, Kelly Roberts. I'm a sophomore here and I'm in gymnastics. And, well, as previously said, I think sports aren't just for the sole purpose of getting a scholarship or becoming a huge player. I think sports have a much greater effect. And I completely understand why they're on the recommended list for being cut. It's very expensive to have our practices somewhere else. And I can only make suggestions for what else I see as a student could maybe be cut. Driving by school when it's dark out, lights are always on in the hallways and everywhere, and I'm pretty sure all the staff's gone. I understand we have a automatic light system, so maybe if that was changed to manual, the lights could turn off and save some electricity. And for like all sports, like our season this year in gymnastics, we had to have seniors drive us and parents drive us to all meets and practices. And I think if that was mandatory for all sports, that would save quite a bit of money too. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Excuse me, young lady, could you tell me your name again, please?
Kelly Roberts.
Thank you.
Roberts.
Thank you.
Chris Bedoyan, 70 Spring Road. I have a couple of questions, maybe not comments, but under your list where it says remove freshman sports, in comparison to the other sports where it says to be removed, are those able to be private funded as well? Is that an option?
That could be an option.
Okay, I
Yes.
understand they're more of a luxury, but I have 2 sons that had great experience with freshman sports and might not have had the opportunity without them, so kind of near and dear to my heart. And then the only other question I had is, in comparing the removal of the freshman sports and the cost of $15,000 compared with the list of the other programs and only a savings of $30,000, is there some place to see clarity as to what that $30,000 is comprised of? Understanding where hockey has to be a fairly large cost in terms of rink rental, swimming, for a pool rental. It just seemed like I would have thought that number would have been higher.
For the hockey, that's the biggest component of that $30,000, you're right. And I'm not going to say there's an exact formula to this. What I was generally looking at, and I know that Dr. Thornton has done this in years past when he was considering these kinds of things. So I worked with Mr. Marcello, and I looked at all of the costs for each sport, and I had to do boys and girls. So Hockey is a primo example because that is something where we do this off campus. It's very expensive for the ice time piece, and relatively speaking to other sports, it's fewer participants. So high cost, low participants, and so that puts it right at the top of the list. Some of the other sports are not necessarily the most expensive, but when you consider the few participants involved, again, it's not that they're necessarily few, but they're few compared to a lot of other sports, for instance. So that put those on the list as well. So some of these really don't come up to a heck of a lot of money, and maybe that's a good thing because it would make it a little easier for them to get the fundraising piece done if they need to. That would probably be easier for, say, tennis than it would be to fundraise for hockey because, you know, maybe roughly the same amount of players, but there's a different expense component. But those were the primary factors, and after that there was the boys and girls doing things equally.
And then, two other points was on the fundraising where the business partnership coordinator.
Right.
If those funds were, say, related to signs on the football field, how would those funds be directed? Or is it at the discretion of the school committee how those funds would be used? Or would they be strictly for athletics? And say if something was done in the band room, would that be for the music programs, which I think was important?
That would ultimately be up to the school committee to make those decisions. It could become the discretion of the school committee to say if something is done with athletics in mind, the money goes to athletics. I could see a number of different areas where we could use the help and funding for this around technology, around athletics, around, just these teams that we have listed here in the freshman sports program. If we can find athletics-related advertising that funds these things, we've got it taken care of, and those are cuts we don't have to make. So that would be great. But I think it would be an option for the school committee to say, there are other areas that are priorities that we need to fund as well, so that may play into it. But I wouldn't have a problem either way. We just haven't gotten to that point yet. Right now, we did a lot in the fall and we had this discussion a couple of times about creating an RFP that allowed for really any kind of advertising, everything from, a local hardware store putting up a banner in the gymnasium to, Gatorade putting advertising all over our lockers in the school, and everything in between. But because we don't have a point person to oversee that, I think a big component of this is you got to go out and get it. They're not just going to call you. So I really feel we need that part. And I don't see it as a stretch at all to think that at least $30,000 or so could come in from that. I would expect way more than that. And hopefully that will help us, whether it's this year or in future years on future budgets, so we don't have to reduce more teams or more of the arts program.
Thank you.
Hello, Colleen Pickering, 35 Rome Street. Our school and our town is made up because of all the extra things that we do offer the children besides reading and math. And I don't have much faith in the state giving us a lot of aid anymore. I think it's all going to be back on the towns. And so the line item, we were going to hire someone to go out and get privately funded. I think that's the way things are going to, the way I'm hearing and seeing things, we're going to have to look for private funding to run a lot more things. And I'm just concerned that that line item isn't enough. Because when we make all these cuts, we're saying we can go get, find someone privately funding, we can add this back and add that back. So that person is going to have to really hustle and have a job. So we're just hiring for 19 hours, no benefits. I understand that you're trying to be conservative, you don't want to spend a lot of money right now. But as we make these cuts, I'm saying, okay, we want them to go that, support us. It's like, all right, we're going to cut that, but we want private funding. We're going to want private funding for that. We want private funding. So we're giving this person that we're going to hire more and more pressure so we can get all our programs back. So I'm really thinking we might want to up that for that person and hire someone that's really good and is going to get us all this private funding that we need so we can keep all these programs. We can keep the band, we can keep the strings, we can keep the sports, and offer all of our students a really good education. So that's just my concern. I understand going in conservative, but we also want to get a good person for the job, and I don't know if we'll get the right person for the job without the benefits and things like that. That's my concern in this. And the other thing is, I'm glad you're going to put it into a pool, because I hate to see favoritism come into play, where we have a student and their father donated the money for that team, therefore that kid's automatically on that team. So I think it's really important when we make this fund, we put some ground rules on it, the money goes into it, and the school department decides how it gets passed out, because favoritism is going to pop in there real fast.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you.
Hi, hello, I'm Harold Kane, 257 Beacon Drive. I debated whether I should talk, but I guess first of all, I'd like to say thank you to the committee. You put a lot of hard work into it, and at times it's a thankless job. The statement was not a very good turnout tonight, and I kind of agree with that. I think, for the most part, the take is what's done is done. The board kind of set the money, and, yeah, they trust the school district to do the best they can with what they got left. Personally, I've had a couple kids go through the school system. You know, I favor the academics, and that's really what the function of the school is. But I understand some of the parents are really passionate about sports and some of the other things that are getting cut out. I did hear a couple of comments about the librarians. Several years ago, they cut out study halls. The kids don't really have a dedicated time to go to the library. I know my kids use the public library. Libraries are important, don't get me wrong, but their access to it is somewhat limited. So I guess I kind of support that one as opposed to, well, all of these hurt. Maybe I should put it that way. One thing I didn't hear, I heard the one bus, or cutting two buses costs like maybe 5 minutes starting time and 10 minutes in another school. I didn't hear what the third bus that's on the red sheet would cost. If that's another 5 minutes, that might be a less painful $60,000 than someplace else. But I guess, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Good evening. I'm Patty Roberts, 61 Swanview Lane. First of all, I want to give you all kudos, because I would not even dream of doing what you're doing. And Doctor, sorry, you have the hardest job I've ever heard of.
Thank you.
I do want to say, though, one thing I don't get, maybe you can answer this really quick for me, is the whole busing system. My daughter's a walker. I pick her up just about every day, not often, not all that much, but as we leave the parking lot, because I'm one of the last parents, I get stuck by Dr. Cunworthy as he's directing the buses out of the parking lot. Those buses are almost half full, if half empty, whatever you want to look at it. The other thing I wanted to say, and don't get me wrong, I so understand the special need children's requirements, but I see 4, maybe 5 buses picking up 1 or 2 children. Isn't there a way to consolidate that a little bit? I don't know where they go. Please believe me, naive, I don't know. But yeah. I don't know, is our family's trying to, at this time, saving the gas, improve our Stop and Shop point budget? It seems like that would be one of the first things we won't miss it. In the 5 or 10 minutes in the bell, go for it, take it. And it just seems to me that would be a huge help.
I know that, I've had a lot of discussions, in fact, with Mr. Horan, our bus, supervisor this week over all of this. And, one of the things that he told me was that the bus system really circulates mostly around the middle schools. That's where you have the highest user ratio. So a lot of buses will come to the high school, and they're needed to send people to different parts of the district. But they're going to get more usage in the middle school. When you get to the high school, more kids drive, and when they're at at the elementary school, more kids live closer to their school. So there's a lot to the different times and the special ed piece. I know that they look at that all the time. I don't know for every particular bus and, all what you're talking about, but, and that may be used a lot more for a different level than the high school, but I know that those are issues that Mr. Horn looks at all the time. How can we do more with less? And if we go down this road with these cuts, he's going to have to, we'll just have fewer buses and we get the same number of kids to put on them. So, I would imagine you would see those buses looking a little bit fuller and taking a little bit more time to get to the next level, and that's why we would need to expand the times out a little bit.
And just one more thing really quick. The canceling of the sports or the clubs, no matter if they're red, green, yellow, I totally get where that has to come from. But coming from my background, I was a director at a non-for-profit organization in a very affluent town in Connecticut. We had to drop some of our programs. Those kids hung out on the streets. Crime rate, I don't know. It just seems to me that's a whole community-based thing. And again, like was said before, I'm shocked there's not more people here. So again, kudos to all of you. Good job.
Shocked.
Hi, Tracy McHugh, 31 Chimney Rock Drive. First of all, I do not envy any of you for sitting up here having to do these cuts, and it is very painful to see what has happened. But I think people need to understand how our government works in this town and how we've come to this point in time here with the school committee. First of all, our town council is the one that sets the tax rates, that sets the budgets. Our school committee contrives a budget. They present it to the town council, and the town council either yay or nay, which they've done. Now, this school committee has asked the people, and has been warning the people in this town, that if they do not get the funding, which they have not been getting very much funding or next to no funding over several years, that there would be significant cuts. We are here now. I went to the town council meeting, and there were not very many people there to address the concerns and to complain to the town council that they wanted to keep these programs intact. Now we're here at this school committee after the budget's been passed, and now we're asking this school committee, pleading with them not to do things. If we do not have the money, we cannot do these things. It is painful, believe me. I was a beneficiary of this school system. My daughter was. I'm a taxpayer, and I'm very conscious of what's going on. But at the same token, too, I also understand that a good school system promotes good property values. At some point, we are paying extraordinary amount of taxes. What are we getting for it? If we decimate these schools now, it's going to be worse. We're going to be paying for something absolutely nothing. I also have a problem that I see certain school committee members here, Mr. Mudge in particular, who turns around and complains about the cuts coming here, but yet he was also one of the advocates to the town council to encourage them to cut the school budget. So I find that rather confusing and mixed signals, and it distresses me to see that.
Can I explain why?
No, Mr. Mudge, it's my turn.
This is just citizens' comments.
Oh.
So
I have heard.
No, it's just citizens' comments. So
Well, how
Mrs.
come
McHugh
Dr.
has-
O'Jay can talk to the citizens when they come
I
up
really
here?
don't want to
It's
hear. I've
just
heard enough.
Mrs. McHugh's turn.
I've heard more than enough and seen more than enough.
But we have enough money.
No,
If you understood
Mr. Mudge,
that.
you were
See,
Okay. It is only Mrs. McHugh's turn to speak. This is citizens' comments. So I'll turn back on the mic. Here we go. No. It's just Mrs. McHugh's.
Yeah.
Again, we sit here and we have fictitious numbers. I've always learned...
That's for sure.
Well, Mr. Mudge, that's your opinion. You have a lot of opinions, and not all of them come to fruition. You talk about, well, I can guarantee that the state... I don't think anybody can guarantee the state. My dad always taught me, if there isn't money in your hand, you don't have it. A promise is just that, a promise. It isn't there. So for us to sit here and say...
$200,000 savings.
Mr. Mudge, I don't really want to hear it. I've heard it. I've heard it.
$1,000 savings.
Ms. Pugh is the only one who has the floor right now. It's citizens'
You don't like the
comments.
truth at this end when people tell it. I don't want to hear you. I've heard you.
God.
It's white noise. And that's what the problem is, when you have people like you who sit there and talk about advocating for schools, and when you do the things you do, I find it really disheartening. And
I'm
I
not
hope the
voting
people...
for 1 cent of cut. How do you like that?
All right.
I'm not voting for any cuts.
Please, you asked the town council not to fund the schools fully, and that's a cut as far as I'm concerned. It's semantics with you. But the bottom line is...
$1 million
I think
in
that-
reserve is semantics?
Mr. Mudge, you've had all this
Mrs.
time.
McHugh has the floor.
Well, she doesn't know what she's talking about.
Oh,
She's
excuse
attacking
me.
Has the floor.
You know, Mr. Mudge, you leave a lot to be desired. I know enough of what I see, and all I'm saying is that the people of this town have to understand how the government works. We should have been at the town council crying to them and telling them not to cut the schools, to fund them fully. That's why we're in the position we're in right now. Thank you.
You don't know what you're talking about.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like, go ahead, Mr. Blasberg. Sorry.
It's okay. Gregory Blasberg, 70 Whitman Drive. First of all, I'm actually not going to speak to the budget. I'm going to speak to something else. I've spoken before the town council and you folks before as to the budget. I'm going to speak actually to what I just saw. I just want to remind the members of the committee that as members of the public, citizens' comments represents a time when members of the public, some of us who attend a lot of meetings, some of us who attend only occasional meetings, to have their say. As members of the committee and elected officials, you have the opportunity to have your say not only by speaking at the meetings, but by actually having something that we do not have, which is the ability to vote on the actual things that are before you. And it's disappointing to me when I see, and I try not to pick on any individuals, and I'm not going to, though I know everyone here is going to know who I'm speaking to. I've gotten to the microphone before and been interrupted by members of the committee as well when attempting to make a point. And it's very difficult to sit and listen to someone criticize you. It's really difficult for a politician, whether you think of yourself as one or not, to listen to people criticize you. But the fact of the matter is that during this one small portion of the meeting, it's our time as members of the public to have our say, and frankly, you folks get to sit and listen. And I just want to remind you folks of that. And thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who cares to speak? All right. School committee, we have all gotten to speak on this. We've now listened to citizens' comments. Would you like to have another minute to comment, or do you want to vote?
I'd like to have another minute.
Okay, so do we want to comment? Is that what people are saying?
Maybe not everyone. I don't know.
All right. Well, I'll give everyone 1 minute to comment. We'll just go down the line. So I don't have anything more to say right now. So, Mr. Welch, do you have anything that you would like to say?
I want to make an amendment to the motion.
What is your amendment?
That we include the red section.
Second.
All right, so there is a motion on the floor, and there is an amendment to the motion. Is there discussion on the amendment? Okay, go ahead, Mrs. Avanzato, and then Mrs. Benson.
Just briefly, I'm conflicted about this, as I said earlier when I spoke, because we may get the money, but we may not get the money. And I'm concerned that we are betting on something that's not in our hands. I don't want to cause more turmoil by doing this, but as Mr. August said, we are obligated to go with what we have. So I don't know how the rest of the committee may not want to do that. That's fine.
Mrs. Benson and Mr. Busgarden.
I was going to say that I go along with the superintendent on this. He did not ask us to vote on the red section. So, even though we might have different opinions, but we still listen and take some things at heart that you say, Dr. O'Day. So we shouldn't vote on the red section because that was your suggestion for the budget, and I think we should stand behind that. And individual ideas, that's a separate table.
Mr. Busgarden?
Thank you. You know, Ms. Amazano and Mr. Welch, you know, I see your point, and I understand it. Dick, I completely understand and appreciate your analogy about betting on the come. That's something that I've said here. That's how I look at things professionally and personally. Just like Ms. McHugh said, if you don't have it, it ain't there. But on the other hand, I look at this and I say, well, we could approve everything that we're looking at here, both sides of the sheet, go home, we're done. And then it gets printed in the paper, it's in the news, we have fish gutted this budget. And then in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, we go back and go, and then we have to amend it and put things back. But in that time frame, and Dr. O'Shea, I think you and I have spoke about this, that parents start seeing this, and if they were on the fence about keeping their kids in private school or public school, then they move on and they start looking at places like Henrican and Prout and all the other private schools there are. Folks in Jamestown are going to be doing the same thing. And when, in fact, maybe Jamestown will do the same thing, that they say, you know what, we're done with this. If we were never serious about East Greenwich and Narragansett before, we will be serious now. And then they start those wheels in motion, and maybe those are wheels that we cannot stop. I would rather not vote. I would vote against against Dick's amendment, because I think it's easier to go ahead and add to it as opposed to doing it all and taking it back.
Would anyone else like to speak on the amendment? All right, so we have an amendment on the floor. The only thing I will say is that I don't think that we need to decide on this tonight. I think that we can decide on this later, so that would be my feeling.
Why not? It was a motion made.
Yes, we have to vote on the amendment. So, Lorene, if we could take a roll call vote on the amendment.
Melvoin Benson.
No on the amendment if it's to take the red section tonight.
Okay. John Busgarden.
No.
Mudge.
No.
Kimberly Page.
No.
Richard Welch.
Yes.
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
Fails 4-2, the amendment.
We still have the main motion on the floor. So at this time, are we ready to vote on the main motion? Mr. Avanzato.
I just want to say a quick thing about the reductions to the library. It's extraordinarily difficult during school hours to get any access to the library. Like during class hours, you're not allowed to leave any given class to go to the library. The librarians require you to show a pass saying that you had permission to go to the library. And even in the one free period we have, which is advisory, they now are restricting people from leaving that classroom too. So anything that would restrict students from going to the library after school would basically eliminate their ability to go there voluntarily. There are some occasions where a given teacher will take their class down to the library for a day, but other than that, then it'll be really, really difficult for students to have any kind of access to it, and I don't see that much of a way that they'll have clear and consistent access to the library.
Thank you. Mrs. Benson.
Mr. Azavano, is that why we see such large foot traffic at the town library of students?
I think that definitely plays into it, but as it is now, you can stay after at the school library. So if that ability were to go away, I think you'd see even more around the town library.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Right.
That's a student thing.
Mrs. Avanzado?
Michael, you also said students use the library in the morning primarily, right? That's when they really all go there, is in the morning before classes, and I just wanted to make that point. I just wanted to thank Dr. Auger. I thank you, Phil, for putting the list that you put together was, as balanced as it could be and thoughtful. I appreciate it. I know it was an ugly task. This is difficult for everybody involved. I wanted to thank you for that. I think we need to take everyone's suggestion, people that came up and made suggestions. Of course, we take them all seriously. We may look at some of those things. I'd like to look at the transportation audit issue at some point. But we're basically at the end of where we can go. I mean, you can swap one thing out, but you understand that we are tapped out here. And I just need to say this. I don't want to play into any kind of us versus them situation, but I also feel an obligation to make the facts clear. I've been sitting on this committee for 4 years, and in the 4 years that I've been sitting here, the town with a much smaller budget has taken most of the local tax money, the lion's share of it, with the smaller budget. They have not level funded themselves ever in the 4 years. They could have done that this year. It's been done in other communities for the sake of supporting schools. They have taken a zero, and they've given the support to the schools to get them over the hump if there was a bad year. And the council didn't choose to do that. They gave 2% raises to the town, and we cut our people, again, to zero. This is not to attack them. This is just factual. And it's important that people know the facts to understand the situation. The town's also lost revenue. They've lost car tax revenue and other things, and they've used that money to fill that hole, and I understand that. We've gotten some stimulus money that's done that for us. However, the fact remains that they know the situation that we're in now. They have the $9 million sitting in their surplus fund, and that they've chosen to go down this road. Next year, it's going to only be worse. They have not made a lot of cuts to their own budget. I didn't see them cut anything. The low-hanging fruit at the town side, such as recycling once every other week, or other suggestions that other people can make, other citizens can make, I haven't seen taken. Again, not to start, it's not a back and forth, it's a professional comment on the situation as I see it factually, and what's happened in town. It's a real shame to see it come to this in North Kingstown. I don't think it's necessary. That's all.
So anyway, Mr. Mudge.
Yes. Well, I'd like to take a little umbrage with that statement, because how could we possibly accumulate a $2.6 million surplus over 3 years and not have enough money for education? How could we possibly do that? Thank you.
Mrs. Held?
I had a question about the surpluses. Our school department maintains a contingency fund balance the same way you do, and our recommendation by our financial person and our business manager and the auditors is that it be at least 10% of our budget, and we try to maintain that. We do fund capital projects. I think it is a really horrible idea to fund operating expenses with the fund balance, but capital projects are a different story, and we routinely do that with anything we feel comfortable with. But we always do want to maintain a contingency fund, a balance of funds that we can use for unanticipated expenses. Is it the recommendation of your auditors that you maintain a fund balance of approximately 10% of your budget or not?
$5 million?
It's my understanding in the conversations that I've had, 2% has
2%?
been.
Okay.
And that is to cover for emergencies.
Right, okay. So it's, your recommendation is 2%?
I would love to have 10%.
Yeah, no, I
can't imagine what we'd have to cut to make that happen tonight.
Well, that's why I'm asking, because I didn't know what your fund balance is supposed to be.
Right.
And have you in the past taken fund balances to fund capital projects?
It's my knowledge that we have,
Okay.
yes.
But never operating expenses?
No, and I don't know all of the details, but we have had, years, I know that Dr. Thornton, had been looking at, this year as being a particularly tough year, and there has been strategizing in previous years to do some work with fund balance in order to provide kind of a cushion. And that can be a good thing, and it can be a bad thing.
Because I've never heard a recommendation that you do that for operating expenses.
Right. And so, we're at the moment, we're in a good place with it. Okay. As far as what we've always felt where it should be. So I would like to, considering that we do not get any funding, have not gotten any lately for capital projects, I feel like we need to dip into it a little bit for that and still retain some to cover for emergencies. I can certainly understand, the point about not necessarily even having one, but when you come into emergencies, and I don't think the town necessarily always understands this, especially in terms of like special education issues. Kid moves into the district, they have significant special needs, and that's very costly. You need a place to go for that. And if you cut that too much, it makes the process of finding the funding for that much more difficult. So,
Dr. Shea, I've heard that for 10 years now, starting back with Dr. Haley. And by the way, when we come to this issue, okay, if we have a funding problem, God forbid, we do have a roof that collapses, or we have an air conditioning system that has deteriorated and it's failed or whatever, we have an option for that. And that's to go to the town council and say, you're carrying, a generous budget, 10%. We need it for emergency purposes, and we go to get the money from. And if they turn us down, then they're responsible for it. But we have a funding source. That emergency funding source is the town's 10% surplus, which is about $9 million right now. So there's no reason that we have to keep, any surplus per se.
Well, the president of the town council at the meeting where they voted suggested that we keep our own capital reserve fund because they're unable to fund these things.
Well,
so,
we have a motion on the floor,
my point
and
is,
we have everyone who's spoken except for Mr. Busgarden and Mr. Welch. So, Mr. Busgarden, if you would like to take your time now, and then Mr. Welch. Do you have anything, Mr. Busgarden, to say on the main motion?
Yes. Dr. Ajay, you know how I feel. I mean, I'm not fortunate enough that I can take hours, take up time during the day to come and sit with you, but I do spend time with you on the phone, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these things with you. This is it's very hard. A lot of these things are going to affect the future of the kids. Kids tomorrow, or next year, will not be afforded the same opportunity as kids this year. To me, that's a shame. I just hope that I hope that we're able to restore some of these things when we get the state and federal funding back, and try to keep this place as whole as we can for a lot of different reasons. I don't have a kid in this system. I don't have a horse in this race, but I do know what the advantages my daughter got here 4 years ago, and it's a shame that the kids moving forward aren't going to have those advantages. But I also understand there's a balancing act. Our property taxes, our property values are primarily centered around this school. If this school is taken away, our property values wouldn't be worth what they'd be worth nothing. So for us we're walking a tightrope, and I said this to members of the town council, not in public, because I just don't feel it's right for a school committee member to stand up and speak as a public citizen, because it will never be viewed that way, because they would say, wait a minute, he's a schools committee member, so, he has vested interest in my vested interest is my property. And I think that we're walking a fine line that we keep having struggles that we are with the budget, then sooner or later our property values are going to start dipping even more than they already have in the last 4 years, and it's going to be Katie bar the door. turn the lights out, last person leaves.
Same.
Mr. Welch, you want to make
I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. It's been stated up here on more than one occasion that we take our fund balance and we spend it. And Mrs. Advisano made a statement earlier, which I agree with. It's a no-win situation. We've been told through the town council that we create a surplus, so obviously we don't need the money. And if we spent all the money, they'd say, well, we give you the money and you find ways of spending it all. We created a surplus because of federal ARA funds that we didn't spend by creating a continuing problem vis-a-vis creating programs that we had to continue to fund after the money went away. So what did we do with the money? In the current budget, I believe, we took $1.1 or $1.2 million of it and applied it to our budget request so that we didn't go back to the taxpayers for more funding. Had we spent the budget, had we spent the surplus, then that would have been an additional funding that we would have had to get from local taxes. Now, we did take, at the beginning of this school year, some money because we found that we needed a couple of teachers and some additional paras. Now, that was because of changes in the enrollment. Had we not had the fund balance to go to do that, we would have had to gone back to the town council, and the town council would have had to find the money because we had no choice but to employ these people. The last thing I want to say to you is history in this town has gone about not protecting their tax base. And by that I mean residential properties cost money to the town because of children in the school system. When you don't promote business and industry in your community, you upset the balance in your tax base. They added on to that, and I went before the town councils, 3 different town councils, and testified at the state level about giving away a tax-free incentive to a residential development in this community. You can't do that. This property gave us in September 5 special needs kids, September 1, in kindergarten. We had no way of budgeting for that. We had no way of knowing they were coming. Now, the town councils didn't want to understand that. Now, I think they still don't understand it. They forced us into a problem. And the last thing I'm going to say is, all of this nonsense about taking us to court, we don't have any money in our budget to pay for the legal bills that they have forced on us, but we're going to have to pay those bills, which is your tax dollars not working for you the way you wanted them to. Thank you.
All right.
President.
I think everybody's had a chance to speak finally on the motion.
Ask Mr. Welch to explain something, and I would
No,
like to...
I'm not going to do that. You may ask him privately to explain something, but everybody has gotten a chance to speak.
This is for the public's benefit.
For the one last time, so no, I'm not going to call. Everybody had their closing comments, and I don't feel the need to give any other closing comments. So, Lorraine, could we take a roll call vote?
William Mudge.
No.
Kimberly Page.
Yes.
Richard Welsh.
No.
Linda Avanzato.
Yes.
Melvoin Benson.
No.
The motion is for the cuts, right?
Yes, the motion is to approve the orange and the green cuts.
John Biscardin.
Yes.
Motion fails 3-3.
All right, folks, so we're kind of at an impasse here, and what I would say, it is 10:15, so we will have to come back and do this at another time. So it's the sort of thing of...
Make a motion to close the meeting, please.
All right. We have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye.
So, can I remind the committee that we need to have a balanced budget by the end of June, and we're not going to have concessions from ESP or an arbitration decision, and it's going to be close if we have the new state aid figures by then. So we're going to have to make some serious cuts before the end of June.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.